The Rockstar Wants a Wife. Book 5 in the Romance Island Resort series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Chris from Google. 1. Cruise ships were to hangovers what hell was to a burns victim torture. Penny grabbed the toilet seat and hauled herself up off the bathroom floor. No matter how nauseous she felt, she had nothing left to barf up. She remembered that much from last night. She couldn't have drunk enough of that cheap tequila then. Or maybe that scummy Mexican restaurant had watered it down. That's what it was. They'd poisoned her instead of getting her drunk, so that's why she felt so sick. She remembered every heaving, hoiking moment with gut-wrenching clarity, so she couldn't have been drugged. Getting laid would be infinitely preferable to lying on the tiny bathroom floor, sandwiched between the shower and the toilet, wondering if she'd vomit her guts up before drifting into a doze. Someone hammered on her cabin door. "Penny, time to go. You've got breakfast shift, remember?" Breakfast. Good thing she only had to cook it, not eat it. 5 minutes later, showered and changed into an apprentice chef's uniform that felt fresher than she did, Penny staggered out of her cramped cabin, along the passage that led to the cruise ship's kitchens. "Late again," growled Pierre, the head chef. Actually, his name was Peter. She'd found out one night in Sydney, when some drunken blokes had hailed him as Poiter, a fellow Collingwood fan, who had to help them celebrate the football team's victory. Sadly, knowing his real name hadn't made him any nicer to her. If anything, he just hated her more for it. "I told you, you turn up on time and do your job, or I'll find another apprentice who will." Penny nodded and tied on her apron, keeping her head down so she didn't inhale the heady sense of food that she didn't want. "You're on pancakes this morning," he added maliciously, his eyes daring her to protest. Pancakes were usually a kitchen hand's job, not a trained chef like she was, but Penny didn't mind the mindless task of spooning, watching, flipping and sliding the perfect circles of fluffiness onto people's plates. She'd first learned to make them on a Macca's grill, and she'd only improved her skills since. Penny was proud of her pancakes. She fell into an easy rhythm, pouring, flipping and sliding until she found herself smiling. Squeals of delight sounded from child passengers as they first saw their personal stack of pancakes. Oh, but there was always one. "I want ones like we had at Disneyland." "I want Mickey Mouse," screeched today's brat of indeterminate sex, screwing up its face. Penny didn't miss a beat. 2 ears, a round face, then another, and another. Within a few minutes she had a perfect stack of mousehead pancakes fit for the royal little shit. "Ooh, look, Minnie Mouse," a little girl breathed, her eyes shining. "Please, Mummy, can I have those too?" Penny liked this mother. Mummy pursed her lips duck fashion, clearly having no trouble refusing her child's whim. Of course it was the overindulged little shits who always got what they wanted, while more deserving people like Penny and this polite little girl didn't get a stinking thing. "I can do it. It's no trouble," Penny found herself saying. Well, it was true. It's not like she had a queue at the pancake station. The dining room was nearly empty this early in the morning. One of the kitchen hands brought out another jug of batter, spiriting away the empties. Penny inhaled deeply as she tested the batter. It had to have the right texture, flowing across the grill with just the right amount of froth. Vanilla and eggs, with the salty undertaste of the real butter she greased the grill with. Maybe she was hungry after all. She'd have to wait a long time before she could sneak a plate of pancakes out for a breakfast break though. Pierre's eagle eyes saw everything. Sighing, Penny told her rumbling stomach to shut the fuck up as she counted the minutes until the end of Pierre's shift, and her self-imposed starvation. 2. The familiar heart-shaped island came into view, and Zan felt an unexpected surge of happiness at the sight. It was her island home now, she reasoned, though not entirely the paradise it appeared. She still had to share it with the man who stood on the rise overlooking the helipad, his arms folded. The helicopter landed with a soft bump. "Thanks, Sho," Zan told the pilot, patting his shoulder as she slid out the door. Instinctively, she ducked her head until she was clear of the still spinning blades, so she didn't see the other woman coming the other way until she almost bumped into her. "Watch where you're going," Gaia snarled, sidestepping. She swept past Zahn, holding her head high despite the whirling death overhead. Idly, Zahn wondered what would happen to the woman's vast fortune if the billionaire lost her life in an unfortunate accident with a helicopter rotor. Then she remembered the magazines she'd seen at the airport. The billionaire was engaged to Jay, apparently. So the rock star would probably inherit everything. As if he didn't already have enough money. Admittedly, it would be a small price to pay, knowing a rich man had grown immeasurably richer, if it meant the world was rid of the unpleasant Gaia Vass. The helicopter door slammed, jolting Zahn out of her thoughts, so she noticed with chagrin that Gaia was safe in the plexiglass bubble, soon to be spirited away from her island. Zahn's island, not Gaia's. Well, Jay's island really, but she managed Romance Island Resort, so that made the whole island her responsibility. You don't know how good it is to see you. Zahn found herself enveloped in an unexpected hug from none other than Jay Felix. He seemed to realize his mistake before she opened her mouth to demand he let her go. Sorry, Zahn. It's been tough here without you. She acknowledged his apology, the first she'd ever heard him utter. I bet. I'm gone for less than a fortnight and you get engaged. Again. His expression darkened. I'm what? To who? Zahn's eyes followed the helicopter's flight. You're billionaire, of course. You're in all the gossip magazines. I think I might have some copies in my carry-on. Zahn wet her lips. Before I left, you were absolutely in love with that travel agent, I thought. But that billionaire snapped her fingers and you sold the ordinary girl to the press. Her heart hardened against the thoughtless rock star. He'd unleashed a media storm on the poor girl until she'd fled from her country town home to who knew where. Hopefully not the media or fickle Mr. Felix anyway. I'd rather kill myself than spend another minute in that crazy bitch's company. We're not engaged and I hope I never see her again. Jay narrowed his eyes as he watched the helicopter disappear. Do you know what she did to Flavia? It couldn't have been worse than his media frenzy, Zahn thought but didn't say. She got one of her staff to hack her email, then leaked everything to the press. Even I didn't know where Flavia lived, but Gaia had reporters on her doorstep, harassing her at work. Jay looked pained. I'm used to the media, but Flavia, she couldn't take it. She disappeared. Wouldn't take my calls. Zahn let this sink in. You mean you didn't set the media on her? Jay snorted. Since when do I ever let reporters near anyone? Not even the girls in the band. I'm the media hog for a fucking reason, you know. And here I thought you were just an attention whore, Zahn said. A normal man would have been insulted. Not Jay. His frown broke into what Zahn thought was a rueful smile. Well, yeah, there's that. But someone had to take all the media's attention. The girls didn't want to do it, so that left me. Lucky me, the press fucking loved me. Especially if I got my kid off. Just the shirt was enough, Joe said, but there was this one time I wanted to go skinny dipping in Sydney Harbour after a show at the Opera House, so me and a bunch of groupies. Zahn covered her ears. I don't want to know. She lowered her hands, then added, nice catching up and all, but I have work to do. I managed to score quite the coup for the resort. She allowed herself a satisfied smile. On top of the deal with Vass Prospecting and Due South, we're now the official venue for the final season of Farmer Bags A Bride, the reality TV dating show. If she sounded a little smug, it didn't matter. She was allowed, damn it. Farmer Bags A Bride? What, like in a sack? Kidnapping women? How the fuck is that entertainment? Jay asked. Zahn wasn't sure if he was joking or serious. It doesn't matter. What does is that the farmers and the film crew will be here soon to do some of the preliminary shooting. It's free publicity for the resort, and we get paid a hefty fee for all the accommodation and facility hire. Joe nearly kissed me when she found out. Fortunately, Jay didn't look like he shared his sister's enthusiasm for the deal, so Zahn shouldered her bag and headed home to her house overlooking the lagoon. Ah, paradise. Yes, she was home. 3. Never eating pancakes ever again, Penny swore, grabbing a wad of paper towel to wipe her face. She rinsed her mouth, then ran the water a little longer, letting it flush away the evidence that she'd thrown up in the sink. This wasn't a normal tequila-induced hangover. She knew that now. Someone must have tried to poison her, either while she was on shore leave or when she got back. Tess, her roommate. Tess had been angry at her since she caught Tess bonking on her bunk with two of the fitness instructors. As if the girl had any right to be angry when it was Penny's bed she'd been screwing two guys on. Guys who hadn't apologized or even stopped. No, they'd asked her if she wanted to join in. Double stuffed by the buff personal trainers? It sounded like one of the porn films in the pay-per-view library the guests got access to. Or one of the erotica books in the library at the resort where she used to work. Penny had refused, then climbed up to Tess's bunk and tried to fall asleep over the grunting and moaning going on down below. Tess had threatened to reveal Penny's smoking habit to the staff supervisor if Penny spoke a word about what she'd seen that night. Crew weren't allowed to smoke aboard the cruise ship, though guests could. Lighting a single cigarette could lose Penny her job. But some nights when Tess was too loud with her boyfriends, Penny would dress in civilian clothes, hike up to the highest deck and breathe in as much tarry goodness as she could suck into her lungs. No one recognized her in the dark, or so she'd thought. God, she wanted one now, to burn the taste of billow out of the back of her throat. "You're fired." Penny lifted her impossibly heavy head, to peer blearily at Pierre. "Poiter." "What for?" Pierre sniffed. "For showing up to work with a hangover again. I told you, I don't tolerate staff who drink to excess before a shift. You are here to cook magnificent meals, not be sick in the sink." "I didn't drink a lot last night." "I'm sick," Penny insisted as fear clutched at her heart. She couldn't lose this job. No one else would take her if Pierre fired her. She'd never be a proper chef. "Your roommate says you were so sick last night, she had to go to the next room to use the bathroom." "Don't lie to me. You are a disgrace," Pierre roared. Maybe she did have a hangover. Her head sure hurt when he shouted like that. "I'm sick," she mumbled. "When the ship docks in port, you will leave it. Until then, report to the housekeeping manager. If you're not working on the ship, you'll have to pay for your passage." Pierre's malevolent smile made her teeth hurt. Pay? Penny didn't have the money to pay for luxury cruise ship accommodation. Why else had she been drinking tequila last night? If she'd been able to afford better, she'd have been drinking it. "No. Just let me work until we reach port. I won't drink any more. I promise." She wouldn't keep a drink down anyway. "You're not working in my kitchen." He was a goddamn drama queen. "Fine. How about here then? I'll wash dishes." She pointed at the benchtop dishwasher and the sinks big enough to stand in. She'd worked plenty such shifts when she was in high school. Anything was better than paying for things she couldn't afford. He eyed her for an interminable moment. "Very well then. But if I find a single plate that is not perfectly clean?" He shook his fist. Penny nodded, not really caring. As soon as he was out of sight, she slithered down the wall to sit on the floor. How was she supposed to wash dishes when she was too weak to stand? Didn't matter, she told herself, grabbing the edge of the sink to hoist herself up again. She'd lean on that for the whole shift if she had to. At least she had plenty of places to be sick if she needed. Drains galore. A grim smile graced her lips as the first cart of dirty dishes arrived. She got to work, loading the plates into the dishwasher, then unloading them onto the drying cart, where they'd stay for barely long enough to drip dry before the kitchen hands came to collect them for the next wave of breakfast customers. With every clink of a plate settling in its rack, Penny's fury built. When she found out who'd poisoned her, she'd make her pay, Penny swore. 4. Of course they're still bachelors. Gay marriage isn't legal yet in Australia, is it? Jay drawled. Zahn hushed him, hoping they hadn't heard him over the thumping rotor blades, and stepped forward to welcome the farmer bachelors to the resort. They both seemed far too impressed with the island to even look at her, but Zahn had grown used to that. Most of the day trippers looked the same when they first walked up the jetty. Hell, she'd probably been just as wide-eyed on her first day here. Less than a year ago, but it felt like longer. Much longer. Both bachelors looked like they'd stepped right off a working farm into the helicopter. Both wore dusty boots, shorts and shirts like locals. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Kununurra," said one. "Derby," said the other. "Which town did you fly from then?" Zahn asked. One grinned. "Town? Nah, I didn't waste time driving into town. All the pilots round here know my station. I bet there isn't a single one who hasn't helped with mustering one time or another." The other bloke cleared his throat. "I only bought the station a year ago. Sold my house in Headland and cashed in my redundancy payment to get the place. I've had a manager running the place for me, but I'm learning to do it myself. Especially if I have a wife to help." He puffed out his chest. Slave labor, Zahn thought, flashing a bland smile. She shouldn't judge. There might be women absolutely champing at the bit to spend the rest of their lives with bachelors just like these two. Not everyone wanted to stay single because the alternative, men, was too much trouble. She'd vicariously enjoy the perfect love lives of the resort library full of fictional heroines, and never need to bother with the real, imperfect thing ever again. Paige, the reality show's host, appeared then, accompanied by two cameramen. She waved madly for Zahn and Jay to move out of the shot, and Zahn was only too happy to oblige. Jay was slower to move, but he did get out of the way eventually. In fact, when Zahn turned to see where he'd disappeared to, he was already slouching off down the path to the lagoon. After a moment, she decided that she wasn't needed either, so Zahn headed for her office, resolving to check on the film crew's progress later in the day. 5. 3 days later, when the ship pulled into Broome, it was quarantined, to Penny's satisfaction. She hadn't been poisoned after all. The ship had suffered a norovirus outbreak, the ship's medical officer said. Penny recovered within a day or two, but Pierre and Tess were two of the first to come down with it, followed by pretty much every passenger who'd eaten breakfast that day. Off the plates Pierre had forced her to wash. There'd been talk of ending the cruise early, so the cruise company could disinfect the ship. That would teach them to employ assholes like Pierre. It wasn't until Penny disembarked amid a pack of pale-faced passengers that she realized she had a problem. The cruise company had paid for all of them to be put up in the hotels in town, which left precious little accommodation for her. The crew remained aboard, forced to clean the ship from top to bottom. Penny didn't envy them. She tried reasoning with Pierre when it became apparent that she truly had been sick, but he held stubbornly to his decision. She no longer worked for him, and the only reference she'd get from him would be a bad one. So she shouldered her bag and boarded one of the courtesy buses provided to transport the passengers into town. She wasn't sure what to do next, but she had enough money to buy a beer, and God knew she needed a drink in this heat. There was standing room only in the Rowie, not something she'd often seen in the town's iconic pub. Nevertheless, she sidled through the crowd to reach the bar, where she waited for ages before the bartender so much as acknowledged her. "What'll it be?" the woman asked. Penny waved her hand. "Whatever pint's cheapest." Today she didn't care what sort of beer she got, as long as it was ice cold. Sure enough, it was. She counted out the last coins in her purse to pay for it, feeling her face grow red with shame. "I take it you're not one of the cruise passengers?" the bartender asked. Penny shook her head. "Backpacker? Looking for work?" Penny set her beer down on the bar. What did she have to lose? It's not like she had a job anymore. "Yeah. We could do with an extra waitress today." "Have you ever waited tables before? Served in a bar?" Penny sighed. "Yeah, and worked in the kitchen too. I'm an apprentice chef, but I thought I'd take a break for a bit." The bartender extended a hand across the bar. "Freener. I'll pay you $15 an hour for as long as I need you today, and at the end, we'll talk about tomorrow maybe." 15 was better than nothing. "Sure. I'm Penny. Freena nodded. Grab an apron in the kitchen. Tell Dirk you're the new waitress. He'll give you a rundown on where to put your orders and where to collect them. She eyed Penny's bag. You can put your things in the office in the back. Penny emptied her beer and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Take that, Pierre, she thought. Not off the ship for an hour and already she had a new job. 6. There. Done. Zaan switched off her computer, stood and stretched. She'd caught glimpses of the film crew and the two bachelors through her window over the course of the afternoon, but she'd been good and stayed at her desk, doing her job. Now it was knock-off time. It would be the most natural thing in the world to stroll past while they were filming, and casually ask about their progress. She picked up her phone and dialed the extension for IT. Before Seb could finish his greeting, she cut him off. Where are they? Clustered around North Beach near the treeline, he replied promptly. Zaan smothered a laugh. Trust the nosy IT boys to know their every movement. The show's bubbly hostess seemed to have a talent for making men melt. Except for Jay, oddly. There must be a history there, she decided. Thanks, she said to Seb, then ended the call. She enjoyed the short walk to the beach, shucking off her shoes so she could feel the sand between her toes. She wasn't surprised to find the farmers and their film crew precisely where Seb had said, but she was surprised to see Jay there. Paige divided her attention between the farmers and Jay, though Jay didn't seem to notice her admiring glances. The farmers appeared too awed by Jay to do more than stammer out responses to Paige's questions, which made the woman snap in irritation. Filming was not going well, Zaan decided. I'm looking for a girl who can cook and clean and isn't afraid of cows. She doesn't have to be a beauty queen, but she should be fit, you know, like me. The farmer flexed his biceps. The other farmer nodded thoughtfully, looking like he approved. Zaan choked back laughter. Paige looked like she was going to explode. Nah mate, no girl will go for that. You gotta romance it up a bit, Jay said. They all stared. Say how pretty your farm is or how awesome it is to have however many head of cattle you have. But how it gets lonely, so you work out a lot and get pretty active, so you'd love to have someone to share it with. Love and laughter over a delicious meal at the end of a hard day's work. Hell, picking the names of this year's new calves. You're looking for a partner, a soulmate to share stuff with. Some mushy shit like that. Jay shrugged. More nods of approval from both blokes this time. How would you do it then? Ventured the one who hadn't spoken yet. If you wanted a wife. Zaan expected Jay to laugh off the suggestion, but he surprised her again. Maybe it was how intently Paige stared at him as she signaled for the cameraman to start filming. Mr. Felix, what are you looking for in a wife? Paige asked. I've met a lot of ladies, lovely ladies, in my career. All of them beautiful and talented in their own way. But you know what? I never met the one. What's so special about the one? Paige prompted. The one should capture my heart. Every touch or smile would strike me like a bolt of lightning. We'd share everything and we'd be equal in everything. For every time I save her, she'll save me right back. She'd be the melody to my bass line. She'll inspire love songs so beautiful I could seduce the whole world, but there's only one woman in the world I want. The one woman who will help me write my first true love song, one to last a lifetime. Even Zaan found herself sighing at Jay's words. The farmers still looked awed, but now they also looked inspired. One of them traded places with Jay. He cleared his throat. When I stand on the highest point on my farm, all the land I can see is mine, because I have one of the biggest cattle stations in the country. You'd think with all that I'd be satisfied, but it's a lonely life. No one to share it with when the sun sinks into the desert, or when the dawn lights up the eastern ranges just right. Now it was Jay's turn to nod, but Paige's smile said she approved too. The rest of the filming went quite quickly after that, with Paige declaring a wrap just over an hour later. The blokes seemed to have bonded over the experience, and were now offering to shout each other and Jay beers in the pub afterwards. After hearing spiels about how miserably lonely it was in the Kimberley for a single bloke, Zahn decided she'd like to alleviate a little loneliness of her own, and offered to join Paige for a drink in the jungle, too. So they took a table in one corner while the blokes claimed one by the bar, and Zahn sipped her way through a ginger beer as she and Paige made small talk about the show. Paige couldn't say much, of course, but she was happy to explain some of the basics. The interviews they'd done today would be edited down to under 5 minutes, before they were uploaded to the network's website. Then they'd open the call for potential brides. In the past, they'd sometimes gotten thousands of applications, and the studio staff would narrow it down to the ladies who ticked all the boxes on the Bachelor's sometimes extensive lists. One bloke had only liked redheads. One particularly short bloke had insisted anyone taller than his shoulder need not apply. One of them had owned an oyster farm, so the girls all had to like seafood and not be allergic. Once they had a short list for each of the bachelors, they gave the lists to the men. Each bloke got his own list, and he had to narrow it down to 20 women he'd like to meet, though only 8 would make it onto the show. Officially, that was because sometimes the girls couldn't get the time off work, or they had other commitments that meant they couldn't make the filming dates, or the farm stay. Farm stay? Zahn asked. The bachelors interviewed all 8 girls and got to pick 4 favorites, Paige explained, who would be invited to stay on the bloke's farm for a couple of weeks. A film crew would go out to each farm with the girls, to record pretty much everything. Every kiss, every alone moment which the crew sometimes had to arrange, planning dates for the couple either on the farm or at a nearby town. The bachelor would send 2 of the girls home within the first week, but the remaining 2 would stay for the duration and meet up with some of his family and friends, before he had to make his final decision. And they're expected to get married? Just like that? Zahn said, trying to hide her incredulity. Paige laughed. It's encouraged, and the studio offers them a pretty sweet bonus if they propose on the show, and then invite the host and camera crew to the wedding, so we can broadcast it between seasons, but it doesn't happen very often. The weddings do get a lot of viewers though, and you see it in the boost in the next season's numbers. We actually have a pretty high success rate. A lot of the couples stay together long after the show. Some of them do get married, and some even have kids. Zahn glanced at the 2 farmers. Do you think they will? Paige donned her professional smile, the same sort Zahn wore when she was being deliberately vague. You never know for sure until you see them with the girls. It's all about chemistry. Jay slapped his hands on their table, startling Zahn. It sure is, but I already told you they won't. They have all the chemistry they need right at that table. Fresh beers too. I figured I didn't want to feel like the third wheel over there, so I said my goodnights, and now I'll say the same to you ladies. It is time for me to watch The Simpsons. He strode out of the pub. I'm sure that's some sort of euphemism for adult films, Zahn said, watching him go. I doubt it, Paige replied. If he wanted to watch Martian Buttsex 69, Jay would probably say so, just to see our expressions. And like me, he is a big fan of The Simpsons. She rose and excused herself, pleading an early start the next day. Zahn headed home soon after, intrigued by Paige's easy explanation about TV matchmaking and trying not to wonder why there was more than one film about, what was it? Martian Buttsex? Oh. No, she would not search the internet to find out more about it. It'd be faster to ask the IT guys anyway. And she wouldn't have to see pictures. 7. Pierre was right, Penny reflected glumly, untying her apron. She wouldn't get work as an apprentice chef again in a hurry. Oh sure, she had a waitressing job, and she'd even found a place to live in a share house in town without too much trouble, but she was as far from becoming a qualified chef as the day she jumped aboard that cruise ship. The universe hated her, that was why. As she cleaned up the last of the tables, she picked up a copy of The Day's West. On the cover was a woman in chef's whites, holding up some sort of trophy she'd won in a competition. Glancing around to make sure no one needed her, Penny took a moment to read the article. Penny's surprise increased with each word she read. Far from being a trained chef, the woman was a mother and office worker in one of the regional towns down the coast. Yet the meals she'd cooked as part of some reality TV program had earned her the status of one of Australia's celebrity chefs. The newspaper dropped from her hand. If she went on one of those programs, she wouldn't need to finish her apprenticeship. Her reputation would speak for itself, and Pierre could go screw himself. She'd be able to open her own restaurant, and never have to look to some overbearing man for direction again. She'd be in charge. 8. Paige staggered into Zahn's office and slumped into her client chair without saying a word. Her stricken expression said plenty, though. Zahn set down her pen. The quotes for the new glass-bottomed boat for the lagoon could wait. Who died? She asked lightly. Paige glared. Zahn felt a chill of dread that she'd have a corpse to deal with. I've lost 2 farmers, Paige bit out through gritted teeth. Zahn reached for her phone. I'll call AT. They can find anyone on the island in less than a minute. Paige laughed harshly. Oh, I know where they are. In one of your hotel rooms, locked in behind a Do Not Disturb sign. I can override any door lock in the resort if necessary, Zahn offered. After all you said about guest privacy and how important it is to the resort, you'd force open a guest's door? Paige mocked. Zahn shook her head, wishing the other woman would stop talking in riddles. Okay, none of this makes any sense. Please tell me what's happened, what course of action you'd like to take, and how my staff and I can help. She thought her voice did a pretty good job at hiding her irritation. Paige gave a mirthless smile. Well, it looks like after yesterday's filming, our 2 farmers got to drinking in your pub. Once the beer had been flowing freely for a few hours, they became the best of mates. Good enough mates to share a few secrets. Turns out they were hiding the same secret, and when one of them spilled the beans. Congratulations. Jay burst into Zahn's office beaming. I bet you never expected your matchmaking to pay off so quickly. Come on, that has to be a record for the show. Zahn rubbed her temples. If anything, Jay made even less sense than Paige. Where are they now? Paige demanded. Jay pulled up a chair for himself. They saw me taking my morning swim in the lagoon, and decided they wanted one too. I told them about my favorite hidden beach, and I bet they're getting all romantic right there now. With who? Zahn asked. You haven't even asked their prospective brides to apply yet. You can't tell me both of those blokes have suddenly turned into Don Juans overnight and both seduced women they've just met? The only women in the pub last night were us. Jay just shook his head, while Paige's expression grew more thunderous. Ah, come on, Paige. Don't be so pissed off. I told you yesterday they were gay. You didn't believe me then, but you can't deny it now. They're out of the closet and thrilled to have found a kindred spirit. It'd be an awesome line to take with the show. Call it Farmer Bags a Partner instead, and turn it into the first gay dating show in Australia. You could always throw in the occasional straight guy too, just to mix things up a bit. I'm sure you'll have plenty of takers. I mean, yesterday for a minute there, even I considered. I called the studio this morning, Paige interrupted. They said they won't champion gay marriage in Australia in the current climate. Their ratings would plummet. And if I can't find 2 replacement farmers who like women, they'll cancel the show entirely. It was Zahn's turn to drop into despair. What? No. I've cancelled dozens of day trips to fit with your filming schedule. All the tourism operators in town are sponsoring this thing. You can't cancel the show. We had trouble enough finding these 2 blokes. No one wants to go on a reality dating show anymore. The drama we put the blokes through on camera, the pressure they're under to find love and make a decision in that short time. These are guys who struggle to ask a girl out on a date, they're so shy and awkward. With budget cuts, we can't afford another countrywide call for bachelors. My budget's effectively zero for the search. What if you were willing to negotiate a bit with the blokes? Dial down the drama a bit and let them see some of the raw footage before it goes to air, so they have a better idea of what the girls are like, and what your viewers will see. Jay suggested. Not a hope in hell. The network executives will never buy it. No one has that kind of pull with them. Paige shook her head violently. Bet I could swing it, Jay said. You'd still need to find farmers, Paige began. Nah, I was thinking me. Zahn and Paige stared at him. Paige recovered first. You want to pretend to be a farmer and make me find you a suitable wife? Even for you, that's crazy. We'd be overwhelmed with applications. Half the female population, not just the ones under 30, would apply. We'd probably get thousands of international applications too. It'd take months just to narrow it down. And everyone knows you'll never settle down. You're the ultimate tomcat, which is why girls love you so much. So don't tell them who I am. Say I'm a mystery man, some sort of celebrity, but don't say who. Hide my identity from the girls until they arrive here for the meet and greet. Sure, you'll get fewer applicants, but I bet you still get quite a selection. And ones who aren't pulled in by my name either, so maybe, if I'm really lucky, you might find me a bride. Zahn watched Jay, waiting for him to admit he was joking. He had to be. No one in their right mind would. Okay, Paige said. But I don't think we could run the show with just one bachelor. Even running with two was going to be hard, because we normally have at least 6. How on earth will we manage to record enough footage to fill a show about just you? Jay grinned. Oh, but it's not just me. It's all about the girls because most of your viewers are women. So have more girls. Double the number. I don't know. We got plenty of space here, and you'd originally planned to have 2 blokes with all their brides-to-be. Paige tapped her chin. But what about the farm stay? The girls are supposed to come and stay with you on your farm. We get really good ratings for the first farm episode. Viewers love watching city girls adjust to rural life. Jay shrugged. Does it have to be my farm? Well, no, but it's not as realistic if it's not yours. I mean, the girls are supposed to be seeing if they can fit into your lifestyle, isolated out here, and this luxury resort isn't exactly slumming it. Jay laughed. My lifestyle, as you call it, isn't as glamorous as you think. But I meant the Pearl Farm on the mainland. Yeah, they have luxury accommodation, but they also have a bush camp they run with one of the tour companies in town. It's pretty basic, but it's a step up from the old Pearl Divers camp that used to be there. Paige stared at him incredulously. You, the rock star, would go camping? Sure. I've been meaning to check it out. If I record a new album next year, I was thinking of setting some of the music videos out there. Now it was Zahn's turn to stare. You mean you're coming out of retirement? Jay shrugged. It's been a year. I don't think I'm old enough to retire. And I still got a bit of music in me. I just need to talk the girls into getting the band back together, or find someone to replace them, if they won't. I figured I'd wait until after Angel's wedding and hit them up then. I was talking to my agent this week, and some of the offers she's had since this whole press storm with that mining billionaire are pretty fucking awesome. I figure a season of reality TV might up the offers enough to buy me another island. He wasn't joking, Zahn realized. It made no sense, but that was Jay all over. So I'll run it by the studio, and if they accept, I'll speak to the sponsors to see if they're willing to offer a bit more for the dates and such. I mean, we kept everything pretty low-key for the farmers, but a rock star would get the VIP treatment all the way, Paige said eagerly. We might have to change the name a bit though, seeing as you're not really a farmer. Got that right. I wouldn't know what to do with a sheep, let alone a whole flock. How about Rockstar wants a wife? Paige nodded. I'll get right onto it. We could even use that video you recorded yesterday. Jay laughed. So you did record it? I wondered. He leaned forward. I'll have some conditions though. Seeing as I'm saving your show and all. Paige bit her lip, waving at him to keep talking. You're not putting me through the same shit you do to the normal blokes. I want access to all the footage, including your private interviews with the girls. I want to see everything before it goes to air, even if it isn't going to air. Paige shook her head. The studio will never go for that. If you know what's going on, there won't be any drama. And with more girls and only one of you, we'll need way more filler to make the show. Instead of just 2 weeks, we'll have to stretch it out to 4. You won't have time to watch everything. And we'll be sending it back to the studio for editing, not doing it here. I can't. Sure you can. Set up a temporary studio here. I'm sure the IT guys would love to hook you up with whatever equipment you need. I'll use it for music videos later, so it's no big deal to me. But I won't do it if I can't see the video. You can air whatever you like as long as it meets with Zahn's privacy guidelines for the resort. Oh wait. If we do most of the filming at Shenton Camp, we won't have to worry about that, will we? Right. I'll have access to all the video you take during the 4 weeks, so I can make my decision with as much background on the girls as I need. But the show needs drama, Paige insisted. You won't? What if I promise to propose in the final episode? Jay demanded. Paige seemed lost for words. All the drama you want. You can set up the girls' stories any way you like for the show. I'm not asking to be able to veto shit, or even try to censor it. I'm only asking to see the raw stuff, so I can make a decision on who I asked to marry me. From the triumph in Jay's eyes, he knew he had her. I'll have to ask the studio, Paige said, looking doubtful. Jay jumped to his feet. When they agree, give Zahn the schedule. This'll be fun. 9. Paige left the office, muttering to herself, leaving Zahn alone with Jay. Why? Zahn blurted out. Why what? There was an edge to Jay's tone. A hostile one that told her not to pry. Zahn ignored it. Why do you want a wife? From a reality TV show of all things. Jay shrugged. Nothing else has worked. Figured I'd try my luck. You never know. He jammed his lips shut. But a wife? Since I met you, you've been trying every trope in the book, no, the whole damn library, to find yourself a wife. What I don't understand is why. Another shrug. Angel, one of the girls in the band, is getting married. If she's doing it, then I figure it's time. The media seemed to think so too, after the way they jumped on the story Gaia fed them. And the reality TV angle? Zahn pressed. I'm used to being in the limelight. This should put paid to the rumors about me and Gaia. Figure this'll test the waters too, see if the public's ready for me to make a comeback tour. Maybe see if they're ready to make me the rightful king of rock again. Jay's rueful grin didn't look particularly optimistic. The strangest thought came into her head and Zahn burst out laughing. You're on a quest, she gasped out. A quest to regain your throne, but first you're looking for the Golden Fleece. I'm what? Jason. Your given name is Jason, right? It's Jason and the Argonauts, with one hell of a modern spin. He climbed aboard the Argo with all his hero mates and headed off in search of the Golden Fleece to win back his throne. Zahn snorted. Bet you pick a blonde. I haven't read that one, Jay said. Heard of it, yeah, but that's all. Did he get the throne, the fleece, and maybe a girl? Zahn sobered. Yes, but there were a few women along the way. More than one. Jason was a cheating bastard, but his wife was a witch, so she had her revenge. Jay shivered. Maybe it's a good thing I'm not him then. Now Zahn had him talking, she figured she'd attempt to learn some more about her employer. What's the deal with you and Paige? We were together for a while before Chaya made it big, Jay said curtly. Then you dumped her? Zahn guessed, disgust rising up the back of her throat. No. Jay's gaze dropped to his clenched fists. She was the news anchor on my first interview, the one that went viral and started it all. The band's career launched that night, and afterwards Paige and I wasn't a rock star then. We dated for a while like normal people, but her social media just blew up. Death threats, hate mail, there was a whole group of assholes who sent her hourly messages about how she should kill herself. Detailed messages. Pictures and descriptions, and fuck, it's no wonder she considered it. He glanced around. You got anything to drink? Zahn held out her half-drunk bottle of water. Jay waved it away. Nah, something stronger. I need a real drink. I have some rum at my house, Zahn began reluctantly. She pressed her lips together before she invited him home. The last place she wanted Jay to get drunk was her tiny unit. Me too. Meet you on the Penguin Jetty? I'll bring the bottle. Jay strode out the door without waiting for her response. And glasses. Zahn shouted after him. Jay waved to acknowledge that he'd heard, but he didn't slow. 10. Zahn reached the jetty first. The tide was on its way in, licking hungrily at the jetty pylons. Zahn's belly rumbled a response. She should have stopped to grab a bite to eat. The last thing she needed was to drink half a bottle of rum on an empty stomach. You hungry? Jay stood at the head of the jetty, with a room service tray in his arms. Zahn could have hugged him. If he weren't her employer and the bane of her existence, of course. Yes, she admitted. Good. I got some fishy bite things from catering. It said panko crumbs, prawns, squid, scallops and stuff on the menu. Jay peered under the cover. You do eat seafood, right? I can call them and get you something else. I'm fine with seafood, Zahn replied, catching a whiff of what Jay held. If it was the seafood tasting platter from the room service menu, there'd be fresh lobster in there somewhere. She could count on the fingers of one hand the number of times she'd eaten lobster. She'd even forgive Jay for forgetting the glasses. He set the tray on the jetty and Zahn realized she'd underestimated him yet again. Dangling from his arm was a bucket of ice, which held the rum and 2 glasses. Wow, she whispered as Jay set out the impromptu picnic. He didn't seem to hear, so she settled cross-legged on the jetty and reached for a crumbed prawn. She crunched into the morsel. Oh, that's good. Really? I never tried it before. I just asked for something that goes well with rum. Jay perched on the edge of the jetty and dangled his legs over the end. Reaching back, he poured 2 generous glasses of rum. Zahn took hers and sipped cautiously. Yes, this was Maya's expensive rum. Like burnt sugar, searing her throat all the way down as it tasted of fairy floss. She raised her glass. To the sad stories we need a drink to tell. Jay snorted, but he drank to her toast. You really want to know about me and Paige? Zahn nodded, her mouth too full of lobster to say anything else. You won't repeat any of this, right? Romance Island resort secrets and all? What happens on the island stays on the island. Zahn nodded again. She nearly died because of me. Our first album was rocketing up the charts. We were booking concerts for a tour of the East Coast and getting offers to tour the US. I was so busy with the band I barely had time to see her, so I didn't realize. Jay took a deep draught from his glass. She showed me the first hate messages and we laughed about them. Trolls will be trolls, she said. I didn't know she kept on getting them and how much worse they got. One day she rocked up at my place. I barely recognized her. I don't think she'd slept for days and she looked a mess. She barely looked at me as she said we had to end it. Our relationship. I was gutted. It was my first real one, you know? Back then I knew she was out of my league, or that's what I thought. She was so famous and I was just some struggling musician. Jay shook his head. Fuck, look at us now. 6 years later. I never thought. Zahn swallowed the last bit of lobster. So she dumped you? She almost laughed, but Jay's grave expression stopped her. What? Yeah, I guess she did dump me, but I was in love with her. I wanted her to give me another chance. So after a lot to drink, I stumbled over to her place and hammered on the door until she let me in. Fuck, if I'd been a minute later, she had all these pills lined up on the table ready to take. I grabbed this big ugly bowl she had sitting on the table, swept all the pills into it, and flushed the lot down the loo. Then I made her tell me everything. Show me everything. All those thousands of fucked up messages day in, day out. She got them on social media. They filled up her email inbox and some people had started sending her letters, old school style, at the studio. They looked like fan mail, but they fucking weren't. She'd stopped going to work because she couldn't face any more of it. So she figured that so many people couldn't be wrong, and she almost, fuck. Jay swiped at his eyes and gave a huge sniff. Mr. Rockstar, crying? Zan kept her eyes on her drink while Jay got a hold of himself. I stayed over that night, but she was adamant. We had to break up because she couldn't take it anymore. If I left her alone, maybe the haters would too. So I left, making her promise to call me if she so much as thought about suicide again. And she didn't, so I figured she was okay. Zan's brow furrowed. But you said your band was on the rise. You were really famous by then, right? If she tried to call you, would she have even managed to contact you? Bingo. Jay hunched his shoulders. I was busy with the band, so I sort of forgot about her. Plenty of girls did want to be with me, so many fans, but I didn't want anyone to have to deal with the sort of attention Paige got, so it was easier just to give the girls one night. One night with a rock star, you know? Something to remember, but too quick for the media to get hold of them. And too many for them to focus on one. For a moment, Zan wondered if that was Jay's true motivation in his succession of one-night stands. He was famous for them, after all. No one could catch the eligible rock star. In a weird, twisted way, it made a perverse sort of sense. But it wouldn't look that way to the girl he'd left behind. What did Paige think of your groupies? Zan asked. Jay stared at the waves beneath his feet. I thought she wouldn't care. After all, she'd said she didn't want me anymore. But last night, she said that's what made her try again. Not pills this time. Her wrists. She managed to slice one, but it hurt so much she couldn't go through with it. She called an ambulance and spent a few days in hospital. That's when her work found out. They didn't know either because she hadn't told anyone. Anyone except me, that is. Jay bit down on a prawn. What happened then? Jay swallowed, then washed the prawn down with a gulp of rum. They were actually pretty good about it, she said. They took her off screen and gave her a production job. She was behind the scenes so no one saw her, and gradually the messages died down. It helped that she didn't have to be on social media anymore. She got a PA who dealt with that. She did mostly reality TV, working her way up to production manager. Usually she does cooking shows, but the host of Farmer Bags a Bride ended up in rehab, so she agreed to do a season. The network told her it'll be the final season, as the popularity's dropping off, so it's about as low-key as you can get. Normally there's 6 farmers, but with budget cuts, she only got 2. Not that she's complaining. Less work, she said, with only 2 storylines to set up. Zan choked on her rum. Set up? I thought the whole point of reality TV is that it's reality, not scripted. Jay laughed. Oh, it's not scripted. Well, not really. But the show's producers manipulate the people in it, putting them in situations where they're on edge and more likely to snap. They want kisses and tears and outbursts, Paige said. But being a dating show, it's different to the cooking competitions she's done before. She has to invent pressure to put these people under, if competing for the same bachelor isn't enough to do it. Making the blokes line the girls up, then publicly reject one, like one of those shows where people get voted off. Only there's just the bachelor doing the voting, and the girls don't have a say. Not really. Zan didn't have time for much TV, but she resolved to avoid reality shows like the plague after hearing that. That's awful. Not as bad as the cooking show. When the producer couldn't think of anything else to do, he had one of the techs sabotage some of the appliances, so there'd be an explosion on the show. The company that made it are still trying to get it back, so they can work out what went wrong. She had to smuggle the wreckage home and into her own rubbish bin. Was anyone hurt? Nah, Jay replied. It just made a big mess. And got them a bigger audience for the show, of course. Danger gets them every time, she said. He drained his glass. That's why she wanted the show set here. The wildness of the Kimberley, with its crocodiles and tides and huge, isolated stations, instead of the tamed vineyards where they usually host the show. She wanted to do a sort of survivor angle to this show to shake things up a bit, she said. Made me promise not to tell the farmers though. She wanted to surprise them so she gets genuine reactions when the camera's rolling. Funny. I tried to warn her but she didn't believe me that the guys were gay. So the surprise was on her. But Jay and Paige had barely looked at one another yesterday. When had they had time to discuss the show in such depth? When did she tell you this? Zahn demanded. Last night after a few drinks, Jay drawled, stretching out on the boards. He grinned up at the sky. Suspicion darkened Zahn's thoughts. You mean you two spent the night together? That's what you meant about what happens on the island, staying on the island? You two hooked up where the media won't find out? She couldn't keep the disgust out of her tone. He'd slept with Paige hours before agreeing to propose marriage to someone else. Nah. Jay didn't sound ruffled. She wasn't interested. We just drank and talked, really. Catching up. I can survive a night without sex, you know. I think I managed a whole week once. Zahn wasn't sure what to say to that. So she changed the subject. She's the reason you're doing this, isn't she? You don't really want a wife. You're just doing a girl a favor. Jay jolted to his feet. I sure as fuck do want a wife. When I go to Angel's wedding, I won't be going alone. Fuck that for a joke. He grabbed the rum bottle and swigged from it. Zahn sighed. The asshole rockstar was back with a vengeance. Thank you for the drink and dinner. I have to work early tomorrow, so I best be getting back. She rose, stretched and started back toward the beach. When she reached the path, she glanced back. Jay stood at the end of the jetty, bottle in hand, muttering. He could take care of himself, she decided, and headed home to bed. 11. Penny hunted through every cooking show website she could find, but none of them were calling for entrance at the moment. Frustrated, Penny returned to the site of the show she wanted most. Unlike the others, this wasn't just cooking in front of other chefs. This one was more of a business startup competition, which made the prize much bigger. Reign of Restaurants was its name. The competition started with a massive cook-off like the others, but the top cooks got to open restaurants in one of the country's capital cities. They got to pick their own menu and serve it to customers for a month, with people voting and reviewing their meals. Sometimes the customers were chefs in disguise, though the cameras kind of gave it away, as there weren't film crews in the restaurant every day. The restaurant had to host a special banquet for the show's host, Paige, and her team of judges, which got scored. Added to the reviews, ratings and the dollar turnover of the restaurant during the month they were open, and one restaurant would reign supreme, with the show letting the winning cook or cooks have the place. If Penny could get on that program and show people just how good she was in the kitchen, she knew she'd be set for life. But the show didn't seem to be running at the moment, though it would usually start soon. Had the show been cancelled? Or was Paige doing something else now? Penny feverishly searched for the show's host. Strange? For someone so famous, the woman didn't have much of a social media presence. The most recent reference to her that Penny could find was in relation to a TV dating show. Penny burst out laughing. Only desperate people went on dating shows. She bet Paige got paid a lot of money to do one of those. She clicked the link to check out the show and a radio announcer's voice boomed out of her speakers. Could you be the one? A muffled voice, slightly distorted, began to describe the qualities of his perfect woman. Not a smoker, of course, making Penny ineligible, but it didn't matter. He wanted a woman who didn't exist and would be way out of his league, even if she did, Penny thought, peering at the video to see what sort of loser they'd duped into being one of the show's bachelors. Instead of the usual talking head, the video behind the voiceover was dark. Well, not completely dark. There was just enough light to see the bloke's torso, wearing an open, unbuttoned shirt. He was sculpted like a Greek god statue too. Now she wondered why a man this hot couldn't get a date. She watched the video a second time, decided that he probably had a hideously disfigured face, and moved to close the browser entirely. Then she changed her mind. What if he was some kind of military hero, who'd been injured in action while saving someone else's life? Everyone would be watching the show. If a girl could get on that and show off her cooking skills to both Paige and the world, she'd be a shoo-in for one of the restaurants next time Paige hosted Rain. Penny scanned the page, looking for details on who the man was. Nothing. The only clue was that he was some sort of celebrity, so the show would be filming at a luxury hotel instead of the usual farms and vineyard. She'd have to buy nicotine patches and hide them well if she wanted to make him believe she didn't smoke. Was quitting for a month worth it? It's not like it'd be the first time. She'd had to quit when she worked at the resort, though she'd started up again since. If it was only for 4 weeks. Anything to get her reputation back. Penny started drafting a letter, telling the studio why she wanted to meet and marry their mystery man. 12. Paige looked more stressed than she had with the farmers, Jason thought, as he helped her out of the helicopter. What a difference a few weeks made. He wondered how much trouble the network bosses had given her over her proposed changes to the format of the show because of him. "Are you ready to interview the girls?" she asked. Behind her, the camera crew climbed onto the helipad. Jason stepped forward to offer his hand, but Paige stopped him. "As far as you're concerned, they don't exist. They're invisible," she snapped. "I want you to act as natural as possible while we're filming. It's just you and the girls. Ignore my stuff." Reluctantly, Jason lowered his arm and nodded to the crew instead. It wasn't his style to ignore any of his staff at a concert. He knew all the roadies by name when they went on tour. It just didn't feel right. Then again, he'd never done any reality TV before, though he'd had plenty of live interviews. He hoped Paige knew what she was doing. "Right. Let's go find you a bride," Paige said. Jason's stomach churned. He hoped she could. 13. They flew in at night, but Penny would have recognized Romance Island Resort anyway. She'd worked there for a season, after all. Even after working on a cruise ship, the resort was still what she thought of when someone talked about luxury accommodation. Even the biggest suites on the ship couldn't compare to the Pearl Villas at Romance Island Resort. Not that she got to stay in a villa. Penny and the other girls were shepherded into the hotel proper, and given standard rooms. They were told to get a good night's sleep and make themselves look good for a meet and greet first thing in the morning, where they'd be interviewed about their hopes for the show. Penny had watched a few reality shows in her time, so she knew the film crew took sound bites from the interviews to use later on in the season, usually completely out of context. So if you mentioned something you hated or said something controversial, you could expect it to come up on the show at some point. The trick was to say something the viewers liked and remembered, like Mystery Man with his talk about the one. She'd heard the girls at the Rowie repeating the video verbatim, wishing they were brave enough or single enough to enter the race for him. She hadn't been game to tell them that she had, or that she'd been one of the lucky few to receive an invitation to actually meet him. Broome being the small town it was, rumors were flying about which hotel he was staying at, seeing as most of the places in town had been asked to sponsor a date with him, so they knew he was here. Hell, they could be serving him lunch right now and they'd never even know it was him. But it all felt much more real when she woke up in the cushy hotel room. She had to dress up and do her makeup for the first day of filming. Funny, she'd expected the show to at least have a makeup artist, but maybe there were too many of them to deal with on the same day. Knowing the Broome weather better than most, she chose light cotton pants and a nice shirt. The resort had beautiful beaches and anything more formal would look ridiculous among the palm trees and white sand. She stuck her cleanest pair of thongs on her feet and made her way to the Jungle, the resort's pub. This early in the day it wasn't open yet, but that hadn't stopped Paige. She bustled around, telling the camera crew and resort staff how to set things up exactly like she wanted them. A bunch of other girls clustered around a coffee pot and a platter of pastries. Penny's growling stomach insisted she go join them, and she didn't argue. The coffee was too hot to taste and the pastries were sweet enough to spike her blood sugar, she soon found, breathing an inward sigh of relief. As she sipped her coffee, she took stock of the competition. She hadn't expected so many. She counted 10 besides herself when one more girl walked into the room. "Oh, this will be a piece of cake," the blonde newcomer said, curling her painted lip. She'd been shoehorned into a short dress that wouldn't have been out of place in a strip club, except for the overabundance of ruffles that helped it cross the borderline into decency. She must have used a whole roll of that Hollywood tape to stop her boobs from falling out too. Penny hoped it hurt when she had to take it all off. She wasn't the only blonde or the only one dressed slutty. But the blondes were outnumbered by the brunettes, and there was even a redhead. There were short girls and average-height girls like herself, ranging right up to the statuesque, sneering blonde, though her heels definitely gave her height a boost. No, Mystery Man hadn't chosen the girls based on physical preferences, unless there was something Penny had missed. Paige clapped her hands for their attention. "Right, girls? Everyone had their coffee? Good, because we have a long day of filming ahead. First, we're going to do your entry sequence." That meant filming them while they walked up the path to the pub, shaking Paige's hand and exchanging air kisses, before taking their place in a circle of bar stools. She made them do it 3 times, despite the whining from girls with heels that hurt to walk in. Next, she had her assistant take them in groups down to the beach, where she had them filmed walking along the sand. The groups who remained were taken one by one to what Penny liked to think of as interrogation booths. She had to sit on a stool under a bright spotlight and answer question after question, sometimes more than once, and she swore the interviewer lost her place and repeated herself. Penny tried to keep her patience though, and hoped she gave the same response each time. It was hard to keep track, especially with the rapid-fire questions. Her hopes for the show. How she'd feel if she won Mystery Man's heart. What she liked most about him so far. What chance she thought she had now she'd seen the other girls. Which girl she thought would win. Her top guesses for Mystery Man's identity. Her idea of the perfect man. Whether she thought Mystery Man would measure up. She answered as best she could, especially when the questions were downright stupid. Of course she didn't know who he was or much about him at all, so she made stuff up, hoping it sounded good. The 3rd time she was asked about his identity, she listed a bunch of superheroes, hoping it would be the last time she heard that question. The interviewer's poker face gave away nothing though. By the time filming was finished, the bar was open, and Penny was deeply in need of a drink. And a smoke of course, but she wasn't allowed that, so alcohol would have to do. "How much is your cheapest pint?" Penny asked the barman, hoping she had enough. "For you free. She's paying." The barman pointed at Paige. Penny sighed and pulled her wallet off the counter. "Oh, while you have that out, you may as well show me your ID. Just to prove you're old enough for beer," the barman said. "If you look under 25 and all." Penny nodded wearily and slid her driver's license across the counter. "Get me a glass of champagne," an imperious voice ordered. Penny didn't need to look. It was the blonde bitch from this morning. "Show me your ID then," the barman said, handing back Penny's. He then completely ignored the card the bitch thrust at him to ask Penny, "So which beer did you say you wanted again?" Penny pointed at the tap marked with one of the boutique beers from the local brewery, one she'd never been able to afford. If she didn't like it, it wouldn't matter, seeing as she wasn't paying for it. As she took her beer, she glanced at the other girl's ID, trying to read the name so she wouldn't have to ask. The girl's perfectly painted claws covered half of it though, so Penny gave up and sipped her beer. Oh, it was good. She hoped she'd have time for another one before Paige sent them all back to their rooms for the night. The shortest brunette walked up to the bar. While the barman brought her soft drink, she stuck out a hand to Penny. "I'm Calais," she said. "Penelope," Penny said, shaking the girl's hand. Calais turned to the blonde bitch, who eyed her coldly like something that had stuck to her stiletto. "I'm Lorelei, and I'm going to win this. You two don't have a chance of making it through the first round of interviews dressed like that, so excuse me if I don't bother remembering your names." She swept away with her drink. Penny frowned. That hadn't been the name on the girl's license. She hadn't read it that clearly, but there'd been no L's. Maybe the bitch was some sort of minor celebrity herself, and Lorelei was her stage name. Calais sucked on the straw of her soda. "So, do you think she's a stripper, a hooker, or a model?" Penny laughed. With that dress, she could be all three. 14. Penny thought she was prepared for the speed dating interview with Mystery Man, but when she found herself pushed into a dark room, she panicked. A spotlight clicked on, blinding her. "Sit down please, Penelope." Penny thought his voice sounded familiar. One of the cameramen from yesterday? Maybe. She couldn't be sure which one, as Paige had instructed them to relax and ignore the camera crew as much as possible. Easy for her to say, Penny thought. Paige wasn't sitting on a stool under a spotlight, expecting to be interrogated by some military type who lurked in the shadows, unseen. His questions weren't barked the way the other interviewers had done. No, he drawled them slowly, his sexy voice lulling her to relax. God, that voice, where had she heard it before? "So what would you say is your best feature, Penelope?" he purred. She took a moment to remind herself that she was here to cook, not let the man melt her insides like chocolate fondue. "I'm a genius in the kitchen," she said, then decided to add, "and not just with food either. You know how they say, if you can't stand the heat, you should get out of the kitchen? Well, I love the heat. And if you come into my kitchen, I'll take your taste buds on a tour more tantalizing than anything you've ever imagined." He chuckled. "That sounds awesome. I might have to take you up on that." It clicked. She did know him. That voice, she'd heard it murmur in her ear when she'd given in to that rock star. Oh, what was his name? She'd forgotten. Not the sex, though. She remembered that. No one forgot that mind-blowing melt-your-undies sort of sex. The sort you wanted so much more of but never got because men like him didn't choose girls like her. They ended up with models like Lorelai, who didn't deserve any of what the universe handed to them on a platter. She was so busy daydreaming, she missed his next question. Mortified, she asked him to repeat it. "What's your idea of the perfect date, Penelope?" Her mind went blank. I don't know," she stammered. "I think I'd like to leave that up to the guy who asked me out. And if he made sure I had a really good time the morning after, I'd cook him a breakfast fit for a rock star." Oh fuck. She held her breath, hoping he hadn't realized she knew who he was. Well, sort of. She still couldn't remember his name. She breathed a sigh of relief as he launched into the next question, hoping the interrogation would end soon. 15. Penny escaped to the bar as soon as Mystery Man was done with her. It wasn't that she wanted to get away from him as much as got the mortification of some of the stupid things she'd said. She tried to be funny, replying with a Simpsons joke, and while she thought he'd understood the reference at the time, now she worried that it made her look childish for referring to a kid's cartoon. Rockstars didn't watch cartoons. In the jungle, she could hear loud female voices bragging about all the celebrities they'd met and shagged. Loudest of all was a girl who claimed that she'd even slept with billionaire Guy Vass, and how she'd be willing to do a threesome with Mystery Man and anyone he wanted. Smugly she added, "I told him so too." He sounded impressed. "I told him I give the best blowjobs this side of the equator, and I offered to show him right there in the interview. I think if the cameras hadn't been on, he'd have done it too," another voice piped up. "I said I'd be a perfectly obedient wife, fulfilling his every wish, and if I didn't, he could tie me up and spank me," a third proclaimed proudly. Penny peeped around the palm trees and caught sight of the little group. Perfectly made-up model types, the lot of them. Like Lorelai. Nothing like herself. Penny was as common as they came, talking about cooking and cartoons, when she should have been offering him wild gourmet sex instead. She was so stupid. She'd never make it past the first round. Cooking for him on TV? Dream on, girl, she told herself. She'd be back waitressing at the Rowie before she could blink, while these girls serviced him every moment the cameras weren't watching. What hope did she have against women like that? 16. Jason tried not to yawn as the fifth girl described whatever she'd seen on the porn channel last night in excruciating detail. Where had they gotten the idea he wanted them to talk about sex? Talk was boring. He was more a man of action himself. "How many more have I got left to go?" he asked the cameraman when porn fan number 5 had left. Just one. Callie, I think her name is. A moment later, the shortest girl of the lot crept into the room and climbed onto the spotlit stool. Between her slumped shoulders and downcast eyes, Jason wondered why the girl was so miserable. "Welcome, Callie, to your CIA-sponsored speed date," he quipped. "I'm just going to ask you a few questions and—" She raised her head. "It's Calais, actually." Her voice was surprisingly firm. "Like the city?" he asked. It was her turn to look surprised. "Most Aussie blokes think I was named after the Holden car." "Neither, actually. My family's Greek and Mum wanted her kids to have names that were a bit different. So she picked names she liked from some of the ancient stories. Zan and her talk of quests. Now he couldn't stop thinking about it, and this girl's name was too much of a coincidence for him to ignore. "So this Calais character you're named after. Was she some virginal maiden who became some hero's incredibly faithful and obedient wife? Or did she just get seduced by some god or other?" Jason would put his money on the second one, but she'd surprised him once. It could be the first one. Calais laughed. "Neither, actually. Calais was a man. A hero who went off questing with Hercules and his mates, but Hercules killed him because Hercules' lover didn't survive a battle while Calais did. You're thinking of Penelope, Odysseus' faithful wife, who didn't remarry while he was away at the siege of Troy and taking the long way home afterwards. You've got one of those here too." "A faithful wife?" "No, a Penelope. I met her on the first night. She's nice. Funny too." Jason glanced down at his list of questions, moving on to the first one. He'd had enough of sitting in this stuffy, dark room. He wanted to make his choice and get on with the show. 17. "They're ready for you, Mr. Felix," Hallie, Page's assistant said. Why did he suddenly feel so nervous? It wasn't like he was proposing already. Jason had watched everyone's interview videos again today, to ensure he was making the right decision. The porn girls he dismissed immediately, which left 7. He was only supposed to choose 6 though, which meant one had to go. 4 of them he'd genuinely liked. They'd been easy choices. The other 3 though, model material, all with an eye for the camera. The sort of girl a rock star was expected to have on his arm at events, though he never had before. Any of these 3 would warrant a media splash that would put Gaia's fake engagement into the box of lies where it belonged. Gaia. One of them had mentioned Gaia, thinking he'd be impressed. Actually, he'd struggled not to gag. He'd manfully managed one night with the billionaire, but he couldn't summon the slightest bit of enthusiasm for another. Especially not with another girl watching. Besides, if he sent the girl back to Gaia, they both might leave him alone. There. Decision made. He had his list of 6. Now he just needed to remember it while the cameras were rolling and everyone was looking to him to make his choice. He hitched up his best cheeky grin and waited on the jungle veranda, winking occasionally at the camera. "And now, I'd like to properly introduce our mysterious bachelor, Mr. Go." Ali mouthed. Jason sauntered up the steps. "J'ai Felix." Paige finished, clapping loudly with all the girls. She'd lined them up, like they did to criminals at a police station. Jason felt an overwhelming urge to say, "Yes, officer, that's the girl who said she'd deep-throat my dick while fisting herself." Except that he'd have to point the finger at 5 of them, and Paige would get pissed off because she couldn't show that on TV, so he'd have to go back out and start over. It'd be worth it though to see the shock on their faces. At least they all looked delighted to find out that he was the bachelor to their brides-to-be. That was enough to keep his grin in place while he chose not to cause any more trouble than necessary. "Have you chosen your 6 favorites?" Paige asked. "Yes, Paige, I have." "Well, let's hear their names then." Jason cleared his throat. "First, I have to say what amazing women they all are. Coming all the way out here, not knowing who I am." He dribbled on for the required 5 minutes until he caught Paige's slight nod. "Good. He talked up the girls enough so that the ones who left wouldn't look too bad, and he didn't look overeager to get started. Think of it as foreplay, Paige had said. Spin it out until they're so close they're ready to scream, and then give them a little. And a little bit more. Yeah, he got the picture. He wondered how many bachelors she'd said that to, and realized this was the only dating show she'd done. So she absolutely knew what she was asking for when she suggested he pretend this was foreplay. He could take all damn night if he wanted to. The first favorite I choose is Calais. She beamed, crossed the room to hug Paige, and then gave him a hug too before standing by his side. On the other side of the room a few smug smiles had turned to looks of consternation. Good. The second one will be Maya. Panic had set in among the porn fans. Jason waited until Maya had finished her hugs before he took a deep breath and said, "My third favorite is Daphne." The girl emitted an ear-splitting screech, then insisted on hugging everybody. Jason watched with smug satisfaction as the remaining girls in line wore forced smiles as they awkwardly returned Daphne's hugs. The fourth one is Lorelai. Tall and proud, this girl strutted to his side of the room, joining the line of girls without deigning to hug anyone. He glimpsed Ali's signal and remembered the next bit of drivel he'd promised to deliver. It was really hard to choose only 6 of these wonderful women, and I'd like to thank. He only droned on for 2 minutes this time, cutting the speech short because he wanted to put the remaining girls out of their misery. This was cruel. My fifth favorite is Melissa. The redhead tossed her head and marched across the room, choosing to give him a hug but not Paige. Paige didn't seem put out, so Jason took a deep breath to end this performance. And his mind went blank. Staring at the girl with ebony-colored hair, who was looking at the floor, he completely forgot her name. The Simpsons fan who'd looked the most animated when she was talking about cooking. Come on, her name had to be in his head somewhere. Penelope, someone breathed beside him. He glanced left to find Calais grinning up at him. She nodded toward the same girl. And the sixth and final girl I choose to spend the next 4 weeks with here in the Kimberley is Penelope. 18. Penny's breath hissed out in relief as he said her name. She truly hadn't believed he'd pick her, and now. She opened her eyes to find Paige beckoning her silently to move to where the other chosen girls stood. Oh right. She didn't want to stand with the rejects any longer than she had to. Not so confident now, were they? The cheap tarts who'd boasted so casually about screwing celebrities in the pub weren't going to get their claws in Jay. But Penny might. If she was really, really lucky. She didn't want the man, she wanted the opportunity to cook for him, she reminded herself, but it was no use. For just a moment she let her imagination run riot, that she'd won the competition, and Jay would be hers. If only. Well, that was kind of him, Lorelai said, startling Penny into opening her eyes again. Or perhaps unkind, depending on your perspective. What do you mean? Demanded Daphne. Well, he had to choose 5 other girls after me because it's part of the show rules. So he sent away the girls who might have given me some competition, and gave the rest of you false hope. Now it's my turn to be kind. She stuck her hands on her hips. Forget it. He's mine. Give up hope now because you don't have a chance. Daphne opened her mouth to protest, but she couldn't seem to find the right words. Melissa just looked disgusted, while Maya rolled her eyes. Calais fixed her gaze firmly on the floor, and Penny bunched her hands into fists. How would you know? Penny spat. He chose all of us. That gives you 1 chance in 6. No better than the rest of us. Lorelai looked her up and down. Oh, I am better than the rest of you. And if you don't see it, you're delusional. Penny drew back her fist. Oh good, you're all still here, Paige said. Grudgingly, Penny dropped her hands to her sides. Now the show really gets started, Paige continued. Once the other girls are gone, I'd like you to return to your rooms and pack your things too. We'll spend 1 more night here before we head out in the morning to your new home for the next 4 weeks. Well, those of you who are lucky enough to stay for the full 4 weeks. Not all of you will, by the way. But that's the price you pay when the prize is a rockstar's heart. And what a chest it's in, right girls? No one responded. We'll do a quick set of video interviews with each of you, asking how you feel about our bachelor, now you know who he is. Now's the time to really spill your feelings because Jay will be with us at our new home. I just can't wait. Can you? Where are we going? Melissa asked. Paige clapped her hands. The home of romance, of course. 19. By the next morning, Paige still hadn't been any more forthcoming. Get in, girls. Leave your gear on the jetty, Luke will come back for that next trip. Paige cried, gesturing at the jet boat as if it was a luxury yacht and not one of the Pearl Farm's battered dive boats. Penny and the other girls trooped aboard. Well, all of them except Lorelai, who stood on the jetty, squawking about how she was afraid of boats. Stay on land all alone then, Penny thought but didn't say. Nothing to be afraid of. There won't be any whirlpools in the Sound for hours if you go now, Jay remarked, scooping Lorelai up. She squealed in delight but her triumph was short-lived as Jay took 3 steps, then set her down on the side of the boat. My shoe, she screeched. Penny peered over the side. Sure enough, she could see one of Lorelai's ridiculously high heels sinking into the milky blue water. These are Jimmy Choo's. Lorelai wailed. You have to get it. Penny recognized the name of the Malaysian shoe designer whose wares she'd never be able to afford, and prayed silently that no one surrendered to Lorelai's pleas. The bitch deserved to lose her expensive shoes. She could probably afford to buy a new pair every week. The boat pulled away from the jetty, amid Lorelai's wails of what she was supposed to do with only one shoe. Daphne dealt with the problem. She leaned over, ripped off Lorelai's other shoe and pitched it over the side of the boat. There. Now the fish can have a matching pair. Everyone except Lorelai laughed. Wait, what about Jay? Maya asked, pointing. Jay stood on the jetty, his chiseled chest and abs gleaming in the sun as he waved to them. Luke shrugged. He's headed over on my next trip when I bring the gear. We have to set up camp first. Something rockstars don't have to do. He sounded bitter. Jealous, maybe. Who wouldn't be? Every girl's gaze was fixed on the rock god. The bloke driving the boat didn't exist to them with Jay around. For a moment, Penny dared to hope that Jay could be hers. Every inch of hard muscle, hers to have any time she wanted. Not just once. Her mouth went dry. It was like winning the lottery. No better than that. But not for her. Never for her. The universe hated her. She'd never have someone like Jay. Better to focus on what she was really here for, to showcase her cooking on television, so she could finish her apprenticeship and open her own restaurant. Where she could cook what she wanted, without some overbearing bloke telling her what to do, and people would come from all over the country, no, all over the world just to taste. He looks so yummy, doesn't he? Callie's soft words dragged Penny out of her daydream. I still can't believe I'm here. A month with him sounds like a dream, though I don't think I'll last that long. What do you mean? Penny asked. Well, we won't all get to stay for the whole time. We get eliminated. Voted off the island, sort of. Except Jay's the one who has to choose who stays and who goes. Callie bowed her head. I bet I'm the first to go. Penny surveyed the mousy girl, who probably had a point. From what she remembered, Jay liked his girls outspoken and confident. I hope it's Lorelai. Shit, I wish she'd fallen over the side instead of her shoes. She glanced up, hoping the cameraman hadn't heard that. No, he didn't even have his camera on. It hung by his side, pointed at the deck. Callie laughed. I liked her shoes. I could never walk in them, of course, but they were pretty. Not something you'd want to wear out here, though. She kicked her sneakers against the side of the boat. Penny glanced down at the thongs on her feet. No. The cameraman swore and rushed to the side, camera in hand. What is it? Maya called. There's a pod of dolphins over by the oyster lines. Feeding by the look of it. Luke pointed at some black boys. Penny squinted at the water, and something broke the surface, then slipped under again. Could be a dolphin, but could be a shark too. Plenty of them around here. And there's home for the next 4 weeks. Shenton Bluff. Luke pointed proudly at a row of what looked like tents, lined up along the beach. We're sleeping in those? Daphne whined. I thought we were staying at the resort. There might be bugs. Penny hoped there would be bugs. Big, deadly, venomous ones that wanted whiny bitch for breakfast. Nope, you're not sleeping in those. Your tents are by the fire pit. You have to assemble them yourselves. Lorelei's wailing drowned out Daphne's. Luke raised his voice so he could be heard over the two idiots. First one finished doesn't have to cook tonight, and the last one to finish has to do the dishes. The boat ground to a halt in the shallows, a good 20 meters from shore. Go get them, girls. 20. Penny didn't hesitate. She slipped over the side, landing knee-deep in the warm ocean. She trudged through the shallows to shore. You have to take one of the tent kits to a platform, and when you're finished, it has to look like that one there. Luke shouted. Penny's eyes followed the direction of his outstretched arm until she found the tent in question. Ha! She'd expected the tents to be complicated, but they were the same as the heavy-duty 4-man safari tents she'd used at every school camp. One person could put them up, even if that person was a 10-year-old who wasn't listening to a word her teacher said. The hardest bit was banging the pegs into the ground if it was rocky, or you couldn't find something suitable to use as a hammer. Penny grabbed a kit and hauled it up to the platform furthest from the beach, and beside the only proper building at the campsite. When she grew close enough to read the signs, she congratulated herself on her foresight. The rainwater tanks were a big hint, as were the doors lined up along one side, but the signs identifying it as the toilet and bathroom block sealed the deal. She wasn't wandering around in the dark through the camp when she needed to go to the loo. She emptied her bag on the raised decking. Tent centerpole, but no pegs. Swearing, she dropped to her knees and searched the bag for them, but the tent pegs were nowhere to be seen. She'd have to head back to the fire pit and see if another kit had spares. Penny stomped across the decking, annoyed at whoever had forgotten to pack her tent kit properly. She didn't notice the metal ring until she caught her toe in it. Too late to correct, she sprawled onto the sand dune, getting a face full of sand. Shrieks of laughter floated up from the fire pit. The other girls had reached the tents just in time to see her face plant. Swearing some more, Penny dragged herself back onto the platform to rip out whatever had tripped her. Sure enough, there was a metal ring firmly fixed to the platform with a clinking carabiner clipped to it. But it looked like it was supposed to be there. Maybe the reason there weren't any pegs was because she didn't need any, Penny mused, unfolding her tent so the base spread across the platform. She pulled one of the peg loops over to the metal ring and clipped them together with the carabiner. Crawling across the platform, she did the same with the other tent corners. Much easier than hammering pegs into hardened clay, and much sturdier than shifting beach sand. All she had to do was put up the center pole, throw the flyover and tie that down. Easy. Whoever's tent goes up first doesn't have to cook. Luke bellowed, striding along the path to the bathrooms. You'll get to relax with us blokes by the fire pit. Except, Penny didn't want to be first. She wanted to cook in front of the cameras. That's what she was here for. She surveyed the other girls. Kylie had picked the platform next to hers, and she was unfolding her tent with a bewildered look on her face. On the next platform, Maya and Melissa were puzzling over a sheet of instructions that had come with one of their tents. The two closest to the fire pit had been claimed by the whiners, Lorelei and Daphne. Lorelei had managed to drag her bag up the dune by virtue of her bare feet, but Daphne's heels kept sinking into the sand, and she refused to remove them. She had to help someone else come first. Not Lorelei or Daphne, and the 2 megaseconds were already allies. That left quiet Kylie. If she was first, she'd be too shy to talk to Jay or even Luke. Penny's decision was made. Have you ever put up a tent before? Penny addressed Kylie. Kylie shook her head. I've been camping plenty of times, but we never bothered with a tent. We just threw the swags in the back of the ute and strung up a tarp if we needed it to shelter from the dew. Tents are for townies and tourists." Penny gritted her teeth. "Well, how about letting this townie show you what to do?" "Please," Calais said fervently. With two of them clipping and tying, they had the tent up in minutes. "And Penny's first," Luke roared. "No, I'm not," Penny shouted back frantically. "This is Calais' tent. Mine's that one." She pointed at the staked tent lying on her platform. Scrambling through the scrub to hers, she screwed the center pole together and used it to raise the roof. Next, she shook out the fly and tried to flip it over the top of the tent. The breeze caught it and blew it back in her face. "Shit!" Someone peeled it away from her. "Let me help." "After all, you helped me." Calais offered a smile as she took two corners of Penny's flysheet. Together, they hoisted it over the tent and tied the corners down. "First is Calais, second is Penny. Who will be next?" Luke yelled, sounding like a carnival barker at the royal show. "Who cares?" Penny muttered. "Bedrolls are on the decking outside the kitchen," a female voice said. "That big tent at the end. The one that looks like a canvas donga. That's the kitchen." Penny and Calais glanced up in surprise. A woman, dressed in a uniform similar to Luke's, stood on the bathroom block veranda. "Hi, I'm Beck," she said. "When he's done ordering you around, he'll tell you about the bedding. I'll tell you a secret though. The ones with the best mattresses will have names written on them, because the tour guides claim them. See if you can get Luke's before he does." "But leave yours alone?" Calais asked. Beck shrugged. "All the tents are taken. I'll be sleeping in one of the tent cabins tonight. They've all got beds with linen for the glamping crowd, so I won't need a swag." "Why don't we get beds?" Penny asked. "You'd have to ask the TV crew that. They booked you into the tents. Maybe their budget doesn't run to more than that." Beck nodded toward the two Ms. "You better hurry. It looks like those two are nearly done with theirs." Calais and Penny collected their bedding and lugged it up to their tents, then headed back to the fire pit, where Beck now sat in a plastic garden chair. "Grab yourself a beer," Beck said, pointing with hers. "The local brewery's sponsoring the show, so there's plenty." "No, I need these two for interviews," Paige chimed in, linking her arms through Penny's and Calais. "Show me your little canvas palaces, girls, and tell the viewers your secret. How did you get it up so fast?" Penny summoned a smile for the camera as she forced out a laugh at Paige's innuendo. "Oh, experience. I had lots of practice back home." "Oh really?" Paige purred. "Do tell." Penny launched into a story about every school camp and outdoor education camp out she could remember, leaving out the times she'd shared a tent with Craig Davies, even under the teacher's watchful eyes. Of course, that was before he'd hooked up with that complete skank Kristen, and dumped her at the school social in front of everyone. She'd gotten her revenge though. She'd managed to get a garden hose that reached from the outside tap to Kristen's locker. Then she'd sealed the locker with electrical tape and filled it with bore water on a hot Friday afternoon. By the time Kristen opened it on Monday morning, the locker had been absolutely rank. She'd had to throw all her books out, they'd reeked so badly. And her iPod, which she'd left in there over the weekend by accident. "And how about you, Callie?" Paige asked. "It's Calais," the girl corrected, reddening. "Of course. Have you done a lot of camping, Calais?" Calais stared at her feet. "I grew up on a farm. My brother and sister and I camped out at the creek a fair bit, growing up. When we were younger, we took horses down to the pool at the bottom of the waterfall, but when we got older, we'd all pile into one of the utes and take it up the coast, so we could camp on the beach. But now, that's not fair. You cheated," Daphne screeched. "They had help and you cheated." "Not my fault you're slow," Lorelei taunted, skipping down the dune as Luke finished tying her flysheet for her. He moved to help Daphne next. "I'm not doing the dishes," Daphne continued. I'll ruin my nails." While Paige wasn't looking, Calais slipped away into the bathroom block. Penny hid a triumphant smile. This was too easy. Lorelei and Daphne wouldn't last long, and Calais was too shy to want much camera time. "I should go see if I can do anything for dinner," Penny said. "You should have been first. Why did you stop to help the other girl?" Paige asked. Penny glanced at the camera, which was firmly fixed on her. "She needed help, and we're all in this together, you know? Besides, I like cooking. I'm training to be a chef. I don't want to sit around doing nothing while someone else burns dinner. That's my passion." "Not Jay Felix?" Penny forced herself to laugh. "And him, of course. But you know, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Jay Felix might be a rock star, but he's still a man. Have you seen those washboard abs?" Paige gestured to the cameraman to stop filming, to Penny's relief. "Damn, it's hot here. I need a drink," Paige said. "Me too," Penny replied, following her to the kitchen. 21. Jason rode in the bow of the jet boat, letting the fresh sea air cool his foggy head. So many girls and so much to remember. Their names for a start. He scanned the shore, testing his memory with the people he saw. The little one sitting beside the fire pit was Calais from Katanning. Emerging from the nearest tent was the statuesque blonde. Lorelei, her name was. He couldn't remember where she was from. The curviest one was Maya, and the redhead was Melissa. Where were the other two? The boat keel grated on the sand, and Jason took that as his cue to jump into the water. "Your bag, Mr. Felix." Baz handed it to him. Jason nodded his thanks, slung the bag over his shoulder and splashed ashore. Paige met him with a big smile for the camera trailing behind her. "Welcome to Camp Romance," she trilled. Jason couldn't help himself. He burst out laughing. The blokes at the Pearl Farm would pitch a fit at the new name for Shenton Camp. Come to think of it, so would the tour company who used the place. He had to get a hold of himself. With considerable effort, Jason swallowed back the rest of his laughter and tried to keep a straight face. "Thanks." Paige's fixed smile didn't waver. "Let me show you to your oceanside cabin, Jay." She trudged along the sand track, and Jason had no choice but to follow her. 6 years and she'd barely changed a bit. Paige had always had a fine pert little ass, which her shorts showed off nicely. There wasn't much Jason regretted about his past, but breaking up with Paige was one of those exceptions. He wished they could have done things differently somehow, to save Paige from all the pain she'd gone through because of him, but it was too late for that now. What was done, and no amount of perving on her now would change that. She might as well be as distant as the moon, he'd never be able to touch her again. She didn't want the media baggage that came with him. Would any of these girls want it? Flavia hadn't. She'd cursed him for it too, even though Gaia had unleashed that particular media storm. But this was different. All the girls at Camp Romance had signed up to be seen with him on TV. They wanted the attention, or at least they'd agreed to it. Maybe this was how he should have done things in the first place. Let the public warm up to the woman in his life before he declared their relationship to the world. Social media could go wild with rumors and predictions while they watched love blossom, or at least the beginning of it. 4 weeks wasn't long enough to fall in love. Angel did, his traitorous mind reminded him. She'd vanished, reappeared and woken up from her coma in the space of 4 short weeks, only to fall for that psycho. The one she was going to marry in a matter of months. "You don't look happy," Paige observed, peering through the door of Jason's cabin. Cabin was a generous word for it. It was just a bigger tent than the ones the girls slept in, with canvas draped over a sturdier metal frame bolted to the concrete floor. Like one of those marquees he'd played in when it rained at outdoor concert venues. There were 2 single beds inside the cabin, instead of a stage though. "Who am I sharing with?" he asked. "Nobody, or at least, not yet." Paige winked for the ever-present camera. "Each girl has her own tent, just like you get your own cabin. I'm at the opposite end, and the ones in between will sleep my camera crew and the tour company staff." She pointed up the slope to a wooden structure. That's the bathroom, and the kitchen's at the other end. It's not Romance Island Resort, but the view's to die for. She was right about the view. If you angled your head just right, the canvas was almost transparent, like it wasn't there at all, and you could see clear across King Sound. Not to the Buccaneer Archipelago, of course, which was hidden around the eastern headland, but that only added to the feeling of isolation. When all this was over, Jason wanted to come back here for a week with a few of his guitars and just chill. There was just something about this place. A shriek shattered the peace. "Where's my bedding? My bags are here but nothing else. Where am I supposed to sleep?" Paige swore, then glanced at Jason. "What? It doesn't matter if the cameras are rolling. We'll edit that out or bleep it if we have to." She hurried toward the fire pit, where it looked like one of the girls was having the mother of all tantrums. Jason racked his brain to remember her name as he trailed behind Paige. The shrieking harpy wasn't his problem, so he hung back, watching. Daphne, that was it. From her ear-splitting tirade, he learned that someone hadn't brought enough swags for all the campers, and she'd missed out. Baz and his boat were gone, and no one's mobile phone had any reception out here. The girl wouldn't shut up, though almost everyone in the camp surrounded her, offering her all sorts of things to placate her. All except one. A woman Jason didn't know sat on the kitchen veranda, her expression mirroring his disgust at the girl's performance. Jason sat beside the woman. "I don't think we've met." He extended a hand. "J. Felix?" She laughed shortly and shook his hand. "I know you, Mr. Felix. I'm Beck. It's nice to meet you." She jerked her head at the fire pit. "More than I can say for some. There were enough swags. I counted them myself. Someone's hidden one, and my money's on him." She pointed at the man wearing a uniform that matched hers. "I'd put my money on the TV crew personally," Jay replied. "Trying to create drama for the show." Beck shook her head. "Nah, it's just him being a dick. We've got cabins, but he insists on sleeping under the stars with a swag. Should have brought his own, but he didn't, so he took one of the company's. He won't admit it though. Stubborn git." Jason rose. "Which cabin's his?" "Third one along." Beck pointed. "Time for a hero to save the day then." Jay hitched up a grin and strode into the midst of the mob. "What's this? A lady without a bed?" Daphne opened her mouth to repeat her sob story. "Can't have that," he continued quickly. "I'd be happy to keep you warm tonight, to make up for any mistakes that have been made." Jason found himself surrounded by shocked and horrified expressions. Even Daphne's, though hers quickly morphed into triumph. "All right then," she said grudgingly. "Follow me," he said, leading the way to cabin number 3. He waved her in and smothered a grin when she closed the door behind them. Jason crossed the floor to one of the metal lockers that contained linen in his cabin. Pulling out an armload of the stuff, he foisted it on her. "There. That should be enough. It won't be that cold tonight." Nodding with satisfaction, he walked back to the veranda, whistling. All eyes were on him, and Jason recognized the sort of awe he usually got for being a rock star instead of a harpy wrangler. Well, he was that too. He addressed the crowd. "Now, I want a beer." He'd need a lot more before this was over. This reality TV business was a lot harder than he thought it'd be. 22. Penny did everything she could to make cooking look artistic, but even she had to admit there wasn't much she could do with sauce out of a jar spaghetti bolognese. She just didn't have the ingredients to play with that would make it special. Not that it mattered really, the cameraman kept his case clipped shut the whole time she was cooking. More than once, she glanced over at Calais, sitting primly on her seat beside Jay. The other girls did various chores, stacking wood for the fire, preparing the salad and setting out the plates and cutlery for the meal, but Calais had earned the coveted spot by having her tent ready first. Destiny had dumped on her again, Penny fumed. She should have been first and not helped at all, seeing as no one was recording her culinary skills. Jay leaned in and spoke to Calais, but the girl didn't react at all. Penny smothered a laugh. In the gathering dusk, Jay evidently hadn't noticed her earbuds. Calais had her iPod clenched in one hand, playing music that drowned out anything he said. Dinner didn't take long, so she dished up. She felt slightly mollified when the camera came out just in time to record everyone complimenting her on the delicious meal. Even Jay, who had his mouth full at the time. She hoped they showed that bit of footage when the show went to air. An endorsement from a rock star who was used to Michelin-starred cuisine was quite the compliment. Daphne whined and complained about having to do the dishes, but she quietened down after Luke said he'd come in and give her a hand. Penny picked at her salad, still eating long after everyone else had finished. The sound of plates crashing around in the sink had ceased by the time she was done, so she slipped into the dimly lit kitchen to wash her own plate, figuring she was too late to avail herself of Daphne's dishwashing services. A moan from the darkness stopped her dead. As her eyes adjusted, Penny realized she could see a shape beside the bench at the far end of the kitchen. No, not one shape, two joined at the hip, humping on the bench. "Oh, harder," Daphne begged. "I've dreamed about being with a rock star." Penny fought down biller. The first night here and she was already banging Jay? Was that what he wanted, someone who had sex at the slightest whim, where anyone could see them? Jealousy churned in her belly. But Penny didn't want Jay now, she reminded herself. She wanted to cook on live TV, that was all. Jay was just a complication. A tempting complication, but no more than that. Like the mystery ingredient she had to incorporate into her dish to meet the challenge the judges had set. She left her plate as quietly as she could, and hurried off to bed. She might have seen Jay having sex with someone else, but in her dreams she was the object of his desire. When day dawned, Penny still felt hot from the memories of her dream sex with Jay. She headed straight for the shower to cool off. The cold water was lukewarm, like it always was in the Kimberley, so it wasn't the cold shower she expected, but it was pleasant enough to linger. Penny reached to turn off the taps when a scream sounded from the next cubicle. "Oh my God, it's cold! Is there no hot water?" Maya exclaimed. Penny rubbed herself briskly with a towel. "You get used to it," she called back. "Not bloody likely," Maya returned. "But better a cold shower than none." "Jay's picking someone to take on a date today," Paige said, "so we have to look our best." "For the cameras, not Jay," Penny added silently, pulling on her shirt before flinging the door open. She almost hit Daphne. Finally, the other girl huffed, darting into the shower stall. She slammed the door behind her. Penny heard Daphne's cold water scream from the other end of camp, and from Jay's disgusted expression she judged that he'd heard it too. She grinned. Daphne might have slept with Jay last night, but she didn't stand a chance with him in the long run. 23. "Now you have to choose one of the girls for a date today," Paige told Jason. He nodded, his mouth full of cereal. "We've booked a seaplane with one of the local tour companies, which will take you out to Horizontal Falls. You'll fly over the falls, then land on the water and transfer to a floating dock where—" "Daphne," Jason mumbled through cornflakes. "Where you'll enjoy a lunch of fresh-caught fish. You'll get to feed the pet fish too, before a jet boat ride through the falls too." Jason swallowed. "Whatever. Sounds awesome. I'm taking Daphne." Paige's jaw dropped. "Really? I thought you didn't like her much last night." Jason shrugged. "You said I have to do a date with each of them, right? May as well make her first." Because the moment Paige asked him to eliminate one of them, she was gone. The sooner the better. He'd caught her in the kitchen with the tour guide bloke who managed the camp. What was his name? Luke. And not just in the kitchen, going at it hammer and tongs on the bench. Jason didn't think they'd seen him, seeing as the place had been lit by a single solar light, and they were very busy. At the time he'd been more surprised than anything, but as the evening progressed, irritation had replaced surprise. Weren't these girls here to try and seduce him, not some cranky tour guide? Not that Jason begrudged him the girl, she'd shown him very clearly that she was the last girl he wanted out of this lot. Tantrums were for 2-year-olds, not women he wanted in his life. 2-year-olds were at least 3 years away, if not more. He wasn't ready to be a father yet. Fuck, it's not like he even had a woman he liked enough to want her to be the mother of his child. "All right," Paige said haltingly. "I'll get the girls lined up so you can ask her out." A lineup? He had to assemble them like some sort of army platoon every time he had an announcement to make? Jason finished his cornflakes and a second cup of coffee before Paige had even half of the girls assembled. Apparently even 5 minutes of filming required makeup, and an extended stint in the bathroom. With 6 girls and only 2 small mirrors, that took forever. He was amused to see that Daphne wasn't last today. That honor went to Lorelai, who finally emerged from the bathroom in a pair of teetering heels, which she then minced along the track with while they waited. Jason had to hand it to her though, she didn't trip once. That took some skill. Paige made the girls stand on the edge of the veranda, with the sound as their stunning backdrop. The cameraman signaled for them to start. Jason hated this bit, but Paige had insisted. "Penelope, you made the most delicious meal last night. Kylie, you kept me company while everyone else was preparing dinner. Maya and Melissa, you put together that awesome salad. Lorelai, you stoked the fire so it didn't go out. And Daphne, you worked so hard last night, bent over that bench getting all wet as you did the dishes." He grinned, catching her blush. One of the other girls made a disgusted sound. He scanned their faces and found the culprit, Penelope. Her expression said she'd caught his innuendo. She probably knew what Daphne had done last night too. "But I can only take one of you on a date today, so I choose." Jason waited for the cameraman to film each of the girls' anxious faces, before he got the signal to continue. "Daphne." 5 jaws dropped open with shock, while Daphne sported a coquettish smile. "Daphne, would you like to spend the day at Horizontal Falls with me?" Jason asked. "Why, I'd love to," she said, fluttering her eyelashes. Fuck. Did girls actually do that anymore? Or just this crazy one? Jason shook his head. "Great. Let's get going. I got a seaplane on the airstrip waiting for us." Daphne threw herself at him in a limpet-like hug. Oh. I've never seen a seaplane before." Jason gritted his teeth. This was going to be a long day. 24. Penny waited until the camera crew had left before she stormed off. Jay had taken the little tramp on the first date. And he'd left them all at the beach camp with nothing to do all day while he took Daphne on an adventure she didn't deserve. Horizontal Falls. For all the time Penny had lived in the Kimberley, she'd never been able to afford to charter a plane or helicopter to visit the natural wonder that was the falls. And it went to ditzy Daphne. God, the world was so fucking unfair. She followed the track to the bathroom, then kept going over the dunes, just wanting to walk until her fury was spent. "Hey, wait up!" Kylie called. Penny didn't want to, but she had to admit Kylie had a right to be just as pissed off as Penny was. So Penny stopped, waiting for the puffing girl to catch up. "Are you going to see the graveyard too?" Kylie asked when she reached Penny. "Graveyard? Is that where the track goes?" "That's what Beck said. It's quite a hike. Some of the graves are more than a century old, from when pearl diving first started out in Western Australia, and the divers had a camp here. She said the other divers built a sort of shrine out of bottles for them." Kylie grinned. "We had something like that at my family's farm. No rubbish pickup out there, you see, so my great-grandfather started paving the back garden with empty bottles. There's hundreds of them now, and Dad's scared to dig anything up in case he finds more. I think great-grandpa was a huge drinker." Kylie prattled on, and Penny half listened long enough for her fury to ebb a little. Or maybe it was the hard work of walking up and down endless sand dunes, looking for the mysterious graves. They didn't find them, though they did find a wild beehive in a dead twisted tree, but finally it was close to lunchtime, so they returned to camp in search of something to eat. As she bit viciously into her sandwich, Penny hoped Daphne was having as miserable a day as she was. J2. 25. Jason insisted on taking the co-pilot's seat, despite the insistence of both cameramen that he had to sit in the cabin with the rest of them. The plane was too small for him to miss Daphne's squeals of delight at everything from the headsets to the seatbelts to the map in her seat pocket. After takeoff, the squeals were louder and almost constant, but Jason didn't mind them as much. For one thing, the view out the windows was enough to excite him, and the sound of the plane's engines drowned out most of the noise anyway. He'd heard all the commentary before when he flew to the falls with Gaia, of course, but this time would be different. He got to take a boat through the falls, which he was looking forward to. And he'd heard the saltwater barramundi they served for lunch was some of the best in the world. If that was true, he had to get some supplied to the resort. Romance Island had a reputation for having the best, and Zahn would be scandalized to think they were being outdone by a floating barge somewhere else in the Buccaneer archipelago. Jason braced himself for a rough landing, but the seaplane skimmed across the surface so smoothly he wanted to applaud the pilot. He wondered if he had the money to get a dedicated seaplane for the resort. Something else to talk to Zahn about. Right after he investigated learning to fly one. After all, wasn't John Travolta a pilot? If he'd found time in his busy career to learn to fly, Jason definitely could. Right after he'd dealt with this wife business. The cameraman climbed out first, insisting that Jason had to help Daphne out of the plane like a proper gentleman. Feeling like a fool, Jason offered her his hand as she hopped onto the floating deck. Daphne wobbled anyway, forcing him to catch her before she fell over. More eyelash fluttering accompanied her profuse thanks, and Jason wondered if the whole thing had been staged. By her or the TV crew? Not that it mattered, really. He set her firmly on her feet and set off to explore what he had to admit was a lot more than just a barge. A network of several multi-level floating platforms, helipads and landing areas for seaplanes, all attached to a luxury yacht, made up the installation. A splash caught his attention and he noticed the massive sea cage attached to the barges, teeming with huge fish. Lunch, he realized. The captain and crew assembled on the yacht's deck, lined up much like the girls had this morning. The captain stepped forward, eyeing the cameras. "Welcome aboard the Falls Floating Palace. As you can see, you're our only guests today as we show you our world-class restaurant, with a view to one of the world's natural wonders. After your lunch, I will personally take you through the only horizontal waterfalls in the world, so you can touch the water for yourself and feel the power of the current." Jason knew the spiel was more for the viewers at home than himself or Daphne, but she stood rapt at the captain's words. He might not like the girl much, but she was a way better travel companion than Gaia. At least this girl got excited by nature. Maybe the date wouldn't be so bad after all. 2 hours later, he admitted defeat. Daphne had taken every opportunity she could find to bend over things, presenting her backside to him. After a couple glasses of wine, she'd started dropping hints about how she liked to be spanked. Jason had nearly choked on his beer. Shades of Gaia. He enjoyed the jet boat ride through the falls, whooping loud enough to drown out any noises Daphne made. He knew the camera guys were filming every moment, but that didn't stop him. He didn't care if the world knew he loved thrill rides like this. It was hardly out of character for a rock star. Not like reading romance books. Jason sighed and stared out of the window. What would the hundreds of romance heroes he'd read about do when faced with Daphne? Probably sweep her off her feet and ravish her, like she evidently wanted. He couldn't summon the enthusiasm to want to, though. Maybe there was something wrong with him. He just wasn't cut out for this hero shit. 26. Oh, that man is hung. Daphne moaned for what Penny was certain was the dozenth time. And he wanted me every moment of the day. Couldn't get enough of me. I'll be so sore tomorrow, but oh, he's so worth it. Jay and the camera crew had been called urgently back to civilization, leaving 6 hopeful brides, 2 camp managers and a truckload of curiosity in their wake. Curiosity Daphne was only too happy to satisfy with every gory detail. To hear her tell it, Jay must have been using a supply of Viagra to make it through the day. He'd seduced her on the seaplane, done her on the deck, then fucked her at the falls 4 times before doing it doggy style all the way home. And all with the biggest, hardest dick Daphne had ever seen or felt. Penny wanted to call bullshit, but she'd seen them at it last night, and she definitely knew about Jay's reputation. Resignedly, she admitted to herself that Daphne might be telling the truth. That meant she had to garner attention some other way than sleeping with him. So Penny claimed the kitchen as her territory, cooking every meal and making sure everything was as perfect as it could be, on the off chance that the camera crew returned with Jay in tow. For 2 days she slaved, chopping vegetables with a ferocity only matched by her bitterness at Daphne. She wished it was the girl's fingers under her blade and not harmless carrots, but Daphne didn't come near the kitchen. She seemed to think doing the dishes once meant her drudgery was done, especially now she was Jay's favorite girl. On the 3rd day, Penny had just finished setting up the trestle table for lunch when a boat roared into view, carrying several passengers. She hoped it held supplies too, as they were getting low on food. Paige was the first one ashore, carrying her shoes while she walked barefoot through the sand. "Line up. It's elimination day," she hollered. Penny prayed that she wouldn't be the one to go. Not that she had the faintest idea who would though. Jay barely knew any of them. The only one he'd spent much time with was Daphne, and it didn't sound like there'd been much conversation on that date. It took time to assemble the other girls, who all wanted to redo their hair. Penny didn't need to, she always made sure her appearance was perfect before she entered the kitchen, just in case this was the time she'd be filmed. Plenty of time for the boatload of supplies to be brought ashore. Ice for the cooler boxes and food enough to last them a week. Less if Jay and the camera crew stayed, as she hoped. Wanting to keep her hands busy, Penny grabbed a lettuce before it disappeared into the ice, so she could add it to the selection of sandwich fillings she'd prepared for lunch. She wondered if she should start setting it out now or wait until after the lineup. Ice clawed at her heart. What if she was the one Jay chose to send home? "Where's Penelope?" Paige shouted. Penny stuck her head out the kitchen door. "Here." She shuffled across the veranda to join the other nervous girls. The only one who didn't look scared was Daphne. She looked like the cat who'd gorged herself on canary cream pie as she blew Jay a kiss. Jay didn't seem to notice. He was busy staring out over the water toward the line of black buoys that marked where the oyster cages floated. "Right, Jay, you're up," Paige said. One cameraman filmed Jay walking up the beach toward them, while the other kept his lens on the girls. Jay wouldn't look at any of them. Penny's heart turned colder still. "Wait," Paige insisted. "Brides-to-be, you're all Jay's favorites to be his bride. But now, he has to choose to send one of you home. Whoever he sends home won't get to be his wife, and the whole world will know he didn't choose you. Now, I want you to think about how you'll tell your family and friends that you weren't good enough to be a rock god's wife." "Oh God." Penny swallowed, wishing the woman would shut up. As if she wasn't worried enough about this. She couldn't go home now and tell her family that yet again she'd failed. So Penny prayed for a miracle. 27. Jason shot Paige a look of irritation. She wasn't making it easy for him. He didn't like making women feel bad about themselves. He rarely rejected anyone for precisely that reason. Oh, Gaia had been an exception, with her overweening pride and that acquisitive look in her eye, at least at the beginning. Then her facade had begun to crack and he'd caved into her, like he did to every woman. Yet here he was, supposed to reject someone in front of a recording camera. Not wanting to repeat the same speech as he had when he'd invited Daphne on a date, he kept it simple this time. "You're all amazing women and it's been awesome to meet you. But I have to send someone home, and it's a hard decision for me. One I must make." His gaze swept the row of waiting women, meeting every pair of worried eyes before he settled on Daphne, as he knew he had to. "Daphne, it's time to go home." Jason wasn't sure which girl was more shocked, Daphne or the others. She recovered first though. She let out a shriek and marched across the deck toward him. Jason knew a harpy when he saw one, and this girl was out for blood. His blood. He backed away across the sand, his bare feet carrying him out of her reach, because the girl's heels sank deep into the sand the moment she set foot on it. She pitched forward, but this time no one moved to catch her. This only enraged her further as she clawed her way along the sand to where Jason stood. Someone snapped their fingers and 2 bulky security men hauled the screaming girl to her feet. They dragged her to a waiting 4-wheel drive, bookending her into the back seat, before the car drove off. The sound of her screeching faded away into the dunes. One of the cameramen had accompanied Daphne, but the other lowered his lens and laughed. "Good thing you had security on hand, or Mr. Felix would have copped it. I remember in season 6, there was this one girl who trashed the farmer's house when she was evicted. Slashed his sofas and everything. And in 5, there was a cat fight between 2 of the girls after an eviction. Lots of hair pulling and slapping but not much damage. But that's the first one who really went for the kill." Paige just shook her head, looking grim. "I need a beer after that," Jason announced. "Who else wants one?" The drinks esky was duly brought from the boat, brim full of beer from the local brewery. He cracked one open and drank deeply. "It's barely lunchtime," Paige said disapprovingly. Jason glanced at his wristband. He'd gotten so used to his resort ID tag that now he didn't take it off at all. After all, it was a GPS and watch too. "It's 3 minutes after noon. Definitely drinking time. Lunchtime too. If someone will give me a hand, I'll have lunch on the table in the next few minutes." "Everything's ready to go," one of the girls piped up. "What was her name?" "Penelope, that was it." Jason grinned at her. "Thanks, Penelope. That sounds awesome. I'll give you 2 hands if you like." There was a rush for the kitchen as everyone pitched in to help set out what turned out to be sandwich ingredients, but Jason didn't care. Anything tasted good if it covered the biller that had risen up in his throat when that girl had attacked him. Good riddance. He didn't want a crazy woman who'd try to kill him if he irritated her. No, one homicidal bride was enough for one lifetime. As Jason munched his sandwich, he tried to decide who he should date next. Penelope, the catering queen? Calais, not called after the car? Both seemed to have recovered from their shock and were taking their turn at kitchen duty. Lorelei was reapplying lip gloss while Melissa had settled down to read a book. Jason peered at her e-reader, hoping it was one he'd read, but he couldn't see the cover at all. Stupid e-readers. Not his style. The sound of a door slamming drew his eye to the ablutions block at the top of the dune. Maya staggered out of the bathroom, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, like she'd just been sick. She wearily made her way back to the fire pit that had become their outdoor dining room, refusing all offers of food and drink, even from Paige. Jason waited until Paige returned to the veranda before he asked, "Is she sick? Gastro?" Paige shook her head. She said it was just shock at the violence. She'd never seen anyone behave like that, she said. Jason wished he hadn't. Screaming fans were a normal part of life as a rock star, though usually they screamed for joy. After lunch, Jason insisted that they all go for a walk on the beach before he let Paige line them up again, to await his invitation for the next date. He couldn't put it off forever though. Sighing, he surveyed the remaining 5 girls. They all seemed sane enough. Maya still looked pale though. Paige announced what she'd planned for the next date. Nothing special really. Just dinner and a movie in town, then a night in one of the expensive hotels before returning to Camp Romance. Watching their faces carefully, Jason made his decision. "Maya, will you come to the movies with me?" Maya flashed a nervous smile. "Okay." Her hand was clammy as she took Jason's, but his smile didn't falter as he led her to the jet boat for the first leg of the trip into Broome. Yes, he had made the right choice this time. 28. Paige had picked the restaurant, which was a good thing, seeing as Jason usually ended up at the brewery. While the brewery did good food and beer, it held too many memories for him to want to take another girl there just yet. They didn't even get to place an order. Paige had fixed everything in advance, so they got some sort of degustation menu. Disgustation? Jason had quipped when the waiter told him. Is that where you serve up every strange delicacy you can think of, give us plenty of alcohol to wash it down with, and hope we don't bring it all back up again? He couldn't stifle his grin when both Maya and the waiter arced up in defense of the restaurant's premium offering. He'd done plenty of these sorts of meals back on the East Coast, especially big charity events the band had been invited to. He hadn't exactly developed a taste for wine, but he could admit that it went well with some foods. All right, I'll do it," he said finally when they'd paused for breath. "Just as long as I'm not eating snails. Last time there was way too much garlic on them." Maya closed her mouth with a snap. The first course was pearl meat, apparently, served with a slightly fizzy white wine. Jason had visions of having to crunch through pearls, so he was pleasantly surprised to find a slice of oyster on his plate, carefully arranged on a polished pearl shell. The cameraman fixated on it, wanting to film their meal for nearly a minute before he let them eat. Jason had to admit the pearl meat wasn't bad. Better than snails anyway. The next course appeared to be a salad with crocodile, said the waiter proudly. "It looks like crab meat," Jason said, forking a bite into his mouth. It didn't taste like crab. It was chewier too. More wine washed it down though, and he asked Maya if she liked it. She hadn't touched her salad. "Aren't crocodiles endangered?" she whispered. The waiter heard anyway. "Wild ones are protected, but we get all our meat from a crocodile farm where they're bred for the luxury leather market, and their meat, of course." Maya gulped down her entire glass of wine, not touching her plate until the waiter mercifully took it away and replaced it with the next course, some other local product that Jason didn't quite catch. It seemed to satisfy Maya though, so he figured it was edible. By about the fifth course, she'd thawed enough to manage a conversation about her life outside of camp romance. Jason learned that she was an accountant like his sister, and she sounded just as stressed. They just finished dealing with month-end accounts when the next set arrived, in an endless cycle of too much work with never enough time, especially as no small business owner seemed capable of filling out the electronic forms correctly, which took dozens of phone calls to clarify. He was pretty sure he'd heard Joe swear about the same things. The waiter set fire to their dessert, to the cameraman's fascination, before the alcohol burned out and they were allowed to eat the caramelized mounds. Maya seemed to have talked herself out, so they ate in silence. Jason cursed inwardly. This was why he didn't date. He sucked at small talk and all the things he was supposed to do to seduce a woman. Normally his rockstar reputation was enough to clinch the deal, but Maya wasn't one of his fans. Like all the girls, she'd submitted her profile without knowing who he was. He regretted that now. It had seemed such a good idea at the time, letting each girl get to know him a bit first before they learned who he was, but now it made the whole affair like a lot of hard work. Paige had told him time and time again that the viewers wanted romance and kisses, to match the show's ratings, and the more kisses the better. But he didn't do things that way. Not really. Not since Paige herself, and he'd come a long way from the shy, eager musician he'd been back then. Maya didn't seem any more eager to lock lips than he did, so Jason was relieved when the cameraman lowered his all-seeing eye to remind them that the movie would start soon. The lens was turned to them for the walk to the cinema. Jason offered Maya his arm and she curled her fingers into the crook of his elbow. They were forced to wait outside while the cameraman filmed them standing in front of the century-old Sun Cinemas. Inside, well, that was the funny part really. The cinema was actually outside again, in the open air. Cloth hammocks slung between parallel poles made up the seats, row after row of them. Jason vaguely remembered something similar at Rottnest, when he'd visited as a kid in the school holidays, and they'd turned the old hall into a movie theater. That was different though. Sun Cinemas was like a drive-in, without the cars. Jason and Maya were ushered to the seats in the front row, with several rows cordoned off behind them. It was a weeknight, so the place was pretty empty anyway, but the back 3 rows were full. Jason grinned. Being a backseat bogan was more his style too, but he had to toe the line tonight. If he so much as touched Maya, Paige wanted it captured clearly on film. Someone had provided them with popcorn and drinks, but no matter how seductively that buttery smell tempted his nostrils, he didn't think he could eat a single bite of the fluffy yellow kernels. He offered the box to Maya, who shook her head. She'd eaten her fill of dinner too. The big white screen at the front glowed into life, with an ad for some local business. Something skidded across the screen and Maya jumped. What was that? A snake? More skittering. Jason squinted at the tiny shapes. Nah. Just lizards, I think. Geckos, the ones with sticky toes. They climb all over the ceilings at the resort. Like frogs, really. We can't seem to get rid of them. I guess they want to see the movie too. What movie are we seeing? Maya asked. Jason shrugged. I didn't ask. I didn't pick it. Maya shivered. I hope it's not scary. Not after today. Jason slipped a comforting arm around her shoulder. This he knew how to do. Tell you what. If they screen anything even slightly scary, I'll walk out with you. We can go get a hotel room, order drinks from room service, and watch pay-per-view cartoons until you've had your fill. Maya nodded. Deal. They didn't have a deal though, as the opening sequence of a romantic comedy flashed up on the screen. They both shrugged and settled into their sling seats. Half an hour into the movie, the roar of a jet engine drowned out the sound. Half lying in the hammock chair, Jason swore as the belly of a plane appeared low overhead, so close it looked like it might hit the screen. It didn't though, there was plenty of clearance between it and the screen as the plane commenced its ascent to cruising altitude. As the sound of Qantas movie crasher died away, Jason became aware of laughter from the back rows. The locals were used to this, it seemed, and they took in the tourists' panic as part of the night's performance. I thought it was going to crash too, Maya whispered, releasing her hold on Jason's hand. His fingers tingled as circulation returned. Always an adventure in the Kimberley, he drawled for the camera, before settling in to watch the rest of the movie. 29. Jason toweled off his hair in the hotel bathroom, then pulled on his shorts. It was too hot to sleep in any more than that, even with the ever-present air conditioning. He reached for the doorknob, but voices on the other side of the door stopped him. No, just one raised voice, Maya talking to someone on the phone, he decided. He knew all about the studio's no communication rules during filming, so he didn't feel guilty at all for listening in. If he heard what she said, he could decide whether to report the conversation to Paige or not. After all, she could just be ordering room service. No, let me talk to him, Maya said. A pause followed by, hello sweetheart. Not room service. Jason pressed his ear to the door. Yes. Well, and a couple more instances of punctuated the silence until Maya said, you know you shouldn't watch those movies with Grandpa because they always give you nightmares. More silence. Then don't watch them. Or tell Grandpa to wait until you're asleep before he watches them. You have plenty of movies and shows on your iPad. Ones that do let you sleep at night. Okay. I'll call back when I can, but I don't know when that will be. Yes, I'll be home as soon as I can, but it might be weeks. I really don't know. Put Grandpa back on, please. A pause. I love you too, sweetheart. Jason listened in fascination as Maya proceeded to deliver a lecture to her dad about what movies her 8-year-old son could watch, and why Hannibal Lecter, Freddy Krueger, and Jason Voorhees were not appropriate role models for someone Herman's age. Fuck. He hadn't watched those movies in years. Now he wanted to. Not near Maya though. She sounded like she hated the entire horror genre. Pity. Jason made a big show of rattling the doorknob as he unlocked it, so Maya would have a chance to finish her phone call before he wandered into the living area of their shared apartment. Sweet. Whatever it was. Maya had her back to him, but she evidently knew he was there. You heard all that, didn't you? Jason nodded, then realized she couldn't see him. Yes. You have to tell the people from the TV show about it, don't you? Not if I don't want to. She spun around and stared at him. What? Jason shrugged. If it's not captured on camera, as far as they're concerned, it didn't happen. It's not like you're telling show secrets to your family. Are you? Maya shook her head slowly. Of course not. What's to tell anyway? My son has nightmares enough without hearing about what happened today. He's always had a vivid imagination, and Dad's horror movie marathon will give him sleepless nights for months now. He still can't watch that Disney movie with Princess Tiana because the voodoo villain gave him nightmares. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm a bad mother coming up here for so long. I'm all he's got after his dad left. I shouldn't have left him. He was getting good at this sympathy thing. Jason moved in for a hug, letting her cry on his chest for as long as she needed. He could have another shower, after all, there was no shortage of hot water at this hotel. Maya gave a giant sniffle and pulled away from him, backing up a few steps. Mr. Felix, I've had the best night out in years with you tonight, even with lizards, crocodiles and that 747. I'm grateful to you for everything tonight. But I'm not Daphne or Lorelei or one of your fangirls. I haven't been with a man since and I don't think. She waved at his groin. Jason glanced down. Hugging her had given him the beginnings of a hard-on, which his shorts didn't hide in the slightest. He tried to think unsexy thoughts. Freddy Krueger's face for a start. Fuck, that did it. Flaccid as a dead fish. He cleared his throat. Paige booked us an apartment, not me. We're sharing because it's easier for the film crew to set up in the living area, instead of a normal-sized hotel room. There's 2 bedrooms. We can flip a coin for the bigger bed if you like, or you can just have it. For the first time he cursed his rockstar reputation. I've slept with plenty of women, Maya, but they all approached me and asked me for it. I might be a rockstar, but I'm a gentleman, I swear. If you want me to get another room on the other side of the hotel, I'll do it. She stared at him for a long time. Not just his body but his face too. Finally she said, no, stay here. My tent's closer to your cabin in the camp than the bedrooms are here. Just as long as you don't expect me to put out on a first date. Jason laughed. And I usually put out without expecting a date. Tonight was different. Normal in a way I never thought I'd get to be again. Thank you. He followed Maya's gaze down his body. If you change your mind, you only have to ask. He hadn't made that offer to Daphne, but Maya was different. More down to earth. More normal, and fuck knew he needed more normal in his life. Even if it came with an 8-year-old son. Maya blushed. I won't. But I wish. She raised her phone. Would you let me take a picture? I know I'll regret my decision, but it's the right thing to do. One day I'm going to wish I'd said yes, and if I have a picture to remind me, the fantasy might feel a little more real. Jason grinned and struck a pose. Several actually, while Maya blushed and laughed and snapped pictures. After a few minutes, she remembered herself and put the phone down on the table. Thank you, she whispered. Tell me something, he said. When he had her attention, he continued, do you expect a kiss on a first date? Maya smiled sadly. I don't expect anything anymore. But if a date goes well and I like the man, I don't mind a kiss goodnight. Yearning filled her eyes. Jason wouldn't deny her. He stepped forward, then took another step until she was within arm's reach again. He lifted a hand to cup her face, caressing her cheek with his thumb. Good night, Maya. She closed her eyes and swayed closer, leaning in so her face was millimeters from his. Jason took a deep breath, then pressed his lips to hers. Soft and pliant, parted the tiniest bit so he could taste her sweet breath but not her tongue. A sweet kiss but a short one. Sweet dreams, Maya, he whispered before heading to his bedroom. He closed the door behind him and leaned his head against the cool timber. Fuck. The first of these girls he could seriously consider, but he couldn't, in conscience, keep her away from her son. Thank fuck the cameras hadn't captured any of that. 30. Penny watched Jay and Maya's return with narrowed eyes, and not just because she was facing the rising sun. Jay helped Maya out of the boat and she blushed at his touch. That confirmed it in Penny's eyes. They all knew the pair had spent the night together in town, but Penny was certain they'd spent it in the same bed. Not sleeping. Was that Jay's plan? He intended to sleep his way through all the girls and declare the best bonker his bride? That was bullshit. Absolute, complete, utter bullshit. The sun was barely up and her day was already shot to hell. Savagely, she chopped the bacon into slivers. She'd planned on just dicing it, but now she wanted to turn it into a gourmet omelette that would tantalize Jay's taste buds so thoroughly that he couldn't help but notice her and compliment her cooking. She sliced the onion finer still, wanting the flavor to infuse her cooking with none of the texture to distract from the fluffy egg. And it would be fluffy. She'd beat it by hand into fucking froth. "Watcha cooking?" Penny looked up in surprise to find Jay in the kitchen with her, and no Maya. "Breakfast." Jay jerked his chin at the cutting board. "Looks like more than the toast and cereal I had on my first morning here. Is it a secret recipe?" Penny twisted her hands together. "Not really. Sort of. I'm just making omelettes, but you have to get the balance right between all the flavors and textures or it's too much. I have onion, bacon, eggs, milk, but what I really want is some freshly grated mozzarella. It gives that cheese taste to it without overwhelming and—" She reddened. "Swapping recipes with a rock star?" "Yeah, right." Jay didn't seem to mind. "Is there anything I can do to help? I'm not much of a cook. Mostly because I never really bothered, and now it's so much easier to just order something from the resort chef." "You could fire up the barbecue," she suggested half-heartedly. "Light stuff on fire? I'm your man." Jay grinned, grabbed a box of matches and headed out to the veranda. Penny watched him, wondering if he'd really do it or if he'd delegate the task to someone else. No, he really was a do-it-himself man, she realized, as he leaned over to get a closer look at the burners as he turned on the gas and clicked the igniter. He had a perfect ass too, she decided, as her eyes fixed on the back of his dark shorts. Curved like a ripe plum, just begging you to bite through the skin. Jay coughed. He'd caught her checking him out. "Your barbecue is ready and waiting, madam. Is there anything else I can do?" "Bend over like that a lot more, right where I can see you," Penny thought but didn't say. "You could set out the plates while I cook." "Consider it done." True to his word, Jay had everything out on the trestle table by the time the hot plate had reached the right temperature. Penny splashed a few drops of water on it to make sure. When the droplets danced to her satisfaction, she spread butter over the cooking surface, watching it bubble just the right amount before she added small spoonfuls of onion and bacon, evenly spaced across the grill. She sautéed each carefully until the onion turned glassy and the bacon sent out its savory aroma in a clarion call to the rest of the camp. Next, she poured a perfect circle of the egg mixture so that it engulfed one portion of bacon and onion. Jay clapped. "Breakfast from a master chef." Penny glanced up to see the camera firmly fixed on her and Jay. Finally. She took a deep breath and poured another circle, trying and failing to keep her hands from shaking. The second one was more oval than the first, but the third and fourth were properly round again. She wanted to do more, but it was better to be safe than sorry. The first was already bubbling, waiting to be flipped. With a practiced hand that had mastered hundreds of cruise ship pancakes, she flipped the omelette so that it landed without a wrinkle back on the grill. The second football-shaped one was easy, but she botched the third, folding one of the edges. Penny paid particular attention to the fourth, so it was perfect. "You've got to teach me how to do that," Jay breathed. An apprentice chef teach a rock star how to cook? That was wrong on so many levels. But she'd look bad if she refused, especially with the camera rolling. "If you want," she said, reaching for a plate to place the first finished omelette on. She added a spoonful of buttered mushrooms, still warm from the pot she'd heated earlier. With a few flicks of her spatula, she folded the omelette like a filled crepe. Jay held out the next plate like a well-trained kitchen hand. No, he had the plates laid out along his arm like a well-trained waiter. When had he learned to? "I wasn't always a rock star. Starving musicians have to do something to pay the bills too. And some restaurants even gave me food to take home, so I didn't have to starve." Jay said this in a low voice that only she could hear, but the cameraman was so close that she couldn't be sure. She'd never be able to tell such a personal story like she didn't care if the show shared it on national television. Especially not one that made her look like a failure. Not that he was a failure now, of course. He was the epitome of success. A rock god even. "Can you show me how to do that?" "I promise I'll eat whatever mess I make," Jay said. Penny shook her head to clear it. "I guess." She spooned more bacon and onion onto the grill, explaining every step as she stirred and flipped the piles with her spatula. Pouring the egg mixture was simpler, so she just demonstrated for the first 3 before handing the jug to Jay. "You try." Before she could stop him, he poured a slash of egg across the grill, completely missing the onion, but splashing some on his own foot. "Oops." Penny laughed, wrapped her hand around his much larger one, and guided the jug back to where he should have started. An omelette lake formed, merging with Jay's slash so the whole thing looked like satin, rings and all. The first 3 were ready to flip, so she took care of them, handing her spatula to Jay for his planetary pancake. Run it under the edges to loosen it, then get the spatula right under the middle. You have to get a bit of loft under it when you flip it so it doesn't. Satin splattered in a messy slag heap on the grill. "Bunch up like that." Penny snatched the spatula and did her best to repair the damage. No matter what she did, it wasn't going to be pretty. She served up the other 3, but Jay's misshapen one wouldn't lie flat, let alone fold around the mushrooms. "Look, I can make you another one. There's plenty of batter." "Nope. I'm good." Jay grabbed a fork and dug in. "Still tastes great. This has to be the best breakfast anyone's ever made me, Penelope." He pressed his lips to her cheek in a fleeting kiss that was over before she'd realized what he was doing. And then he was gone, striding down the steps to the fire pit. Penny lifted her fingers to her cheek. Compliments and kisses from Jay Felix. On camera, no less. What a beautiful day it was. 31. "Who are you taking on the hovercraft on Saturday?" Paige asked Jason during lunch. He glanced back at the girls, who were all clustered around the table, making their sandwiches. Who hadn't he spent time with? The sun flashed on a head of coppery hair. Melissa. Good choice for a sunset cruise. I hope you plan to kiss her. The boys told me they have exactly 1 kiss out of all the hours of footage they've taken. 1. And that was when you had egg on your face by the barbecue this morning. I'm not even sure we can use that one. Though if you can't do better, we might have to. Jason screwed his face up in irritation. What do you mean, if I can't do better? I picked these girls because I think they might be bride material. I don't give a fuck what you think about them or me. You don't want me and that's fine, but that doesn't mean no one does. I'm a fucking rockstar now. I can have any girl I want. And I narrowed it down to those 5 there. I don't want better. They are exactly the sort of girl I want. Paige's eyes widened in panic. I meant a better kiss. That's all. Jason wasn't sure he believed her, but he let it go. Good. And I think that's between me and Penelope, even if we do it in front of your cameras. You'd better, Paige muttered. 32. All of them assembled on the beach to watch the hovercraft gliding across the water into the bay. Paige had one cameraman concentrating on the people while the other filmed the sleek craft. Even Jason had to admit it looked like some sort of alien technology left behind from a science fiction film, the way it defied gravity. He wanted one. No, he needed one. The seaplane could wait. He wanted a hovercraft. It beat jet boats hollow. It'd be the perfect runabout around the islands. He could even take it fishing, letting it float on the surface long enough for fish to gather underneath it for the shade, then dropping a line or 2 over the side to tempt the fish to the surface for lunch. Not by himself though. He wanted someone to share it with. One of these girls maybe. If any of them liked fishing. What if none of them did? Jason shook himself. So what if his wife didn't like fishing? He'd take someone else instead. Some of the guys at the resort would be glad to go. Or the Pearl Farm. They might even be able to point out some good fishing spots too. Feeling satisfied with his solution, Jason watched the hovercraft zoom right up to the beach. Everyone clustered around it, exclaiming over the sheer grace of the thing. Over the excited babble, Paige piped up, "So Jay, who's the lucky girl that gets to ride in this baby on a very special sunset cruise tonight?" 5 pairs of eyes turned to him, filled with hope. For a moment, Jason wanted to rescind his earlier decision and take everyone, but he knew Paige had only catered for 2. "Melissa, will you come with me tonight?" he asked, hand out. She laid her fingers on his palm. "I'd love to." 33. The cabin of the craft was pretty cramped. With Melissa, Jason, a cameraman, and the captain? Pilot? The woman driving the thing anyway, there wasn't really room for anyone else. Jason found himself squeezed into one corner with Melissa while the cameraman put as much space between them as possible, in order to get them both into the shot. Melissa shook hands with the driver, who insisted they call her Marama. Melissa introduced herself and Jay to the grinning Maori woman, who winked at Jason. He knew he needed no introduction, especially when he knew all the companies catering for his dates with the girls were sponsoring the show by providing their services for free in exchange for TV exposure. Plus they got celebrity endorsement from a rock star. Cheap at twice the price. Not that Jason had really done paid product endorsements. There'd been plenty of offers, from companies selling everything from musical instruments to alcohol to condoms, but Jason had never needed the money. Now, he was getting up close and personal with every tour company in the region. He should be getting their business cards for Zahn. She'd jump at the chance to have things as diverse as hovercrafts and seaplanes bringing day trippers to the resort, in addition to the regular helicopter flights and jet boat rides. Warm fingers squeezed his arm. Oops. He was supposed to be paying attention to Melissa, not thinking about his hotel manager. Zahn was probably glad he was gone, she definitely wouldn't be thinking about him. Melissa, on the other hand, turned shining eyes on him. "Did you hear that? Those are billions of years old." She pointed at a cluster of rust-colored rocks. "That didn't sound right. But I thought this planet was only 1 billion years old. Doesn't that mean the rocks came from outer space?" Both Melissa and Marama laughed. "Earth's around 4 billion years old," Melissa corrected. "Those rocks are too. So they were formed when the Earth was half the age it is now. And they're still here. The Kimberley must be one of the oldest landscapes in the world. If rocks could talk, I wonder what they'd say about all the things they've seen." A wistful look misted over her eyes. Way to make a man feel insignificant. Rockstar outperformed by a rock. They'd probably complain about the good old days when there were real animals like dinosaurs, not wallabies and geckos and shit, Jason said. "Actually, you might be right," Marama piped up. "There are some dinosaur footprints fossilized into the rock that'll be visible around the point at low tide, in about an hour or so." "Ooh, will we get to see them?" Jason opened his mouth to insist on it. To hell with whatever Paige had planned. If the woman wanted dinosaur footprints, then that's what she'd get. He had to admit he wanted to see them too. He'd been obsessed with dinosaurs when he was a kid, watching all the Jurassic Park movies so many times he could probably still recite the dialogue word for word. Now those were suitable movies to give a boy nightmares. He should mention them to Maya when he got back to camp. "Of course," Marama replied easily. "They're a scheduled part of the tour. Your TV producer said they weren't romantic enough, but they're one of our tour highlights, seeing as the footprints aren't accessible any other way. I said we visit the footprints or we don't do the tour." She finally agreed, but couldn't promise that they'd make it through the final cut. Viewers wanted romance after all. Melissa eyed Jason. "We could help you with that." She didn't elaborate though. "If you can do that, I'll give you both another free tour whenever you want. Without the chaperone." Marama jerked her thumb at the cameraman. Then she resumed her commentary. Marama pointed out the features along the coast as they passed them, talking about the tides and the history and the local Aboriginal customs, until Jason's head felt stuffed full of more facts than he thought possible. "Every rock has a story, doesn't it?" he blurted out. "Of course," Melissa said, and laughed. "Sorry, I'm a geologist. I see sentinels that have stood since the beginning of the world, peaks that have been pushed up by volcanic activity or continental shift so long ago that they've eroded into nothing but hills now, sand that's all that remains from what were probably mountain ranges higher than the Himalayas. Marama talks about a rock that's been a favorite family fishing spot for generations, but even Aboriginal history doesn't touch on the amount of time locked up in the rock itself, before there were any humans or even fish." So she was smarter than him. Most men might be intimidated, but Jason wasn't. Rock stars didn't need to compensate for shit. Plus, he'd always found smart women sexy. They cruised along the coastline until Marama said, "We're coming up on those footprints now. I'll need to set you down on the sand. We'll walk the rest of the way." She twisted something on the control panel and the engine coughed into silence. The hovercraft dropped, its air cushion no longer supporting them. It was still a softer landing than most jets Jason had flown in. Marama cracked open the hatch. "Watch out, the sand's pretty soft and there's still a bit of water around. If you don't want to get your shoes wet, better leave them here." Melissa pulled off her sneakers and socks, lining them up beside the open hatch, but Jason didn't care if his thongs got wet, so he kept his shoes on. "Ladies first," Jason said, executing a low bow. "Nah mate, I'll go first," the cameraman insisted, climbing out quickly. He lifted his camera, backing slowly away from the hovercraft. "I'll tell you when I'm ready to record you getting out. Then the lady can go first." "I'll never get used to having someone filming my every move," Melissa whispered. "How do you cope with the constant attention?" Jason wanted to tell her that no matter what she believed, you did get used to it, and he'd even missed it at times. Was a man still a rock star if he wasn't trending on social media anymore? He summoned a smile. "You just grin and bear it, I guess. And try to forget they're there." "Ready?" came the cameraman's shout. "Now ladies first?" Jason ventured. "I will," Marama said, leaping nimbly out of the craft. "Yep, not quite ankle deep. Perfect timing." In the end, Melissa insisted on going last, so Jason splashed down next. He reached up to offer Melissa a hand, but she evidently didn't see it, as she jumped down unaided. They had to wait for Marama to lead the way, but she was deep in conversation with the cameraman. Eventually, she signaled for them to follow her. Hordes of tiny crabs skidded out of the way as they walked through the damp sand and occasional puddles left behind by the retreating tide. After about 15 minutes of wandering, Marama called a halt. "There," she said, pointing. Melissa darted forward, eager to get a closer look. "Come on, Jay." Her face lit with a wicked smile. "Don't you like dinosaurs? I thought all little boys loved them." There was nothing little about him now, but Jason had to admit his enthusiasm for dinosaurs hadn't waned over the years. Maybe he should sponsor a dig somewhere and hope they named one of their discoveries after him. In the meantime, though, he wanted to see these fossilized footprints. He was surprised to find they weren't much bigger than his own foot, if considerably wider. He knew not all dinosaurs had been huge, but he'd still expected them to be a lot larger. How had these footprints survived millions of years to still exist today, when the creatures that had made them were dead and gone? He longed to make a mark that lasted for a decade, let alone a million years. "Come on, you stand there and I'll put my feet here." "You've got to think like a dinosaur," Melissa said. Bemused, Jason did as she commanded. Marama said they were made by a predator. A theropod, like T-Rex or a velociraptor. A species only found here in Broome, so they named it after the town. I bet when it roared, all the herbivores turned and ran. Jason snorted. "So if I roar, you'll turn tail and bolt too?" Melissa shook her head. "Haven't you watched Jurassic Park, Jay? It's the females that were the most fearsome predators. They tend to be bigger too. If anyone runs, it'll be you." "Not likely. Try me." Jason placed his feet in two widely spaced footprints, tucking his arms close to his chest like a T-Rex, and let loose a roar. He felt ridiculous and awesome all at the same time. Melissa laughed. "I think we've got his attention." She jerked her head at the cameraman. "On 3, we'll both do it again, and then we kiss." Jason nodded, refreshed by her directness. There'd be no beating about the bush with this girl. He sucked in a deep breath while she counted, then waited for her to begin her truly pitiful roar before drowning her out with his own. By the time he ran out of breath, she was laughing helplessly. "You win," Melissa gasped, leaning forward. Jason leaned forward too, struggling to keep his feet in the footprints until their lips met, but somehow he managed it. They kept their lips pressed together for a few seconds in an incredibly chaste kiss, before Melissa straightened again, out of reach. "Now let's hope that's enough for him to leave us alone for the rest of the evening," Melissa said in a low voice. "And that's the awkward first kiss over with, so if we want another one later, it won't feel quite as weird." Jason nodded. It sounded logical enough to him. Hardly romantic and more than a little cold and calculating, but logical. A lot like their kiss had been. No igniting spark, but that could come later. Couldn't it? On the walk back to the hovercraft, Jason brought up the rear, plagued by the wealth of knowledge he'd picked up in the resort library. From its romance books particularly, where first kisses were accompanied by sparks and lightning, body parts melting and clenching as two destined souls connected. He hadn't felt sparks. He wanted fucking electricity, damn it. It was because of the kiss, not Melissa herself, Jason consoled himself. They'd barely touched lips, let alone kissed each other properly. Next time there'd be tongues and breath and bodies getting into the mix. A proper kiss. And who knew what could happen after that?